All right, hi everybody. This is Emma, and I'm here with Cindy. And I'm gonna hand it off to Cindy right away to let you know what we're doing today. It looks like we've just got a couple of people watching live so far, so hopefully we'll get some more people in here as we talk about what we're doing. And I'm gonna start sharing it places. So if you're watching this right now, please share so we can get some more people watching us live. All right, take it away, Cindy.
Okay, thank you. Welcome everybody to our International Working Women's Day Forum here sponsored by March on the Pentagon. If you see me, Emma and I are both rocking our Rage Against the War Machine shirts. I don't know if you can see mine, but you can see Emma's. And so, this is a very important day, I think. March on the Pentagon originally started out as Women's March on the Pentagon. And most of you know the story that back when Trump won in 2016, a lot of women were upset because, he said the PUSSY word and he liked to grab them and stuff like that, which I think it's righteous to be mad at that. I'm angry about that too. But so they started the Women's March. And, they had their pink pussy hats and everything, but they refused to address imperialism, militarism, and internationalism in their program. So we started Women's March on the Pentagon to address those issues. And so we were having a really hard time coming up with a name for for this event today. So we just really made it boring and said it was International Working Women's Day Forum. But today I just had like this idea that we could have called it Well-Behaved Women Rarely Make History Forum. That's a very popular saying. And I look back on history at the women who have made a difference, like Harriet Tubman in our own country, Rosa Luxemburg, Emma, not Emma Fiala, but Emma, her name went right out of my, Goldman, and Emma Fiala for sure, Emma Strawn, Emma Lee. Uh, Emily, we'll just call her for now. And so, they weren't afraid to stand up. As a matter of fact, Harriet Tubman and all the inspirational quotes about liberation and freedom and things like that. I mean, she really put her life on the line to try to emancipate slaves, and she didn't just do it by thinking, "Oh, I'm just going to vote for this politician and they'll free the slaves." No, she got down in the trenches and she, as we know, transported slaves along the Underground Railroad to true emancipation. But she said, "Never wound a snake, kill it." Does that sound like does that sound like she was a pacifist? I don't think so. And so then we have the women of Afghanistan, the revolutionary women of Afghanistan who want the U.S. out of Afghanistan. They're not saying, keep the troops in Afghanistan to save the women. They're saying, no, we have to fight the Taliban. We don't need to also fight the United States, military on top of that. The women of Chiapas in in early in the early 20th century, women in Russia fought with men against the Tsars, against the czars. How do you say that? Czars, and in the Civil War there. So we have to be really. I'm not saying that we're rude women. We don't go to like the bank and yell at people and bully them to get in the front lines. No, there is a snake in the world today. It's called U.S. imperialism. It's called capitalism. And we're not going to be polite when we're fighting that. Unfortunately, International Working Women's Day, which was promulgated by the Soviet Union when the women there got the right to vote before the women in the United States got the right to vote. And as a matter of fact, we still don't have equal rights under the law, under this, holy constitution that we have here in the United States. Women don't. But International Working Women's Day has been kind of co-opted by the establishment to be International Women's Day, and I don't see a lot of internationalism in it. I don't see a lot of people standing up and saying, we got to fight with women around the world in their struggle for emancipation from U.S. imperialism. We have to fight with women of color here in our streets of the United States who are afraid to send their children out to school because they might be killed by the cops. We have to put our bodies on the line with the women who are protecting our water on reservations and things like that. I have like a migraine hangover, so hopefully I'm making sense. So we have, yes, internationalism is something that true socialists fight for, and that's solidarity with all workers around the world to be free from capitalism and imperialism. One of our good friends, one of our members in March on the Pentagon, Mark, said that he saw or listened to something on NPR yesterday, and in their salute to Women's Day, they were talking with female U.S. soldiers who have been to Afghanistan, and that's how it's co-opted. I call it International Women's Day, sanitized for your protection by Kotex and Summer Eve's Douche, sponsored by those kinds of organizations. So we really don't want to sanitize it. We have a great program for you today. Wonderful women talking about various aspects of solidarity and internationalism around the world. We have a video from Randi Nord, who will be talking about the crisis in Yemen. We are going to be joined live by Madelyn Hoffman and Diane Moxley, who will be talking about women and alternative politics. Lisa Davis will be joining us about the emancipation, the Black liberation struggle here in the United States. Our Emma Lee will be talking about women and the community under U.S. imperialism. We'll have a video, I believe, from Ann Martinson, who'll be talking about women and the environment under U.S. imperialism. Mnar Muhawesh, one of our advisory committee members, will be talking about women in Palestine under U.S. imperialism and Israeli colonialism. We'll be joined by Lucy Pagoada-Quesada, and she'll be speaking about women in Latin America under U.S. imperialism and sanctions. And then we'll end with Jessica Swim from the Feminist Uprising, Resisting Inequality and Exploitation. So that's our lineup today. Emma, did you have something? You look like you had something you want to say.
No, just checking everything. There's a lot to manage over here. Are we ready to go into Randi's video then?
I actually, what time is it? I actually had a little bit of a talk about women and mothers and war and U.S. imperialism. So, with all of the wonderful information we're going to be getting today, I'm going to be speaking about women and mothers and war under U.S. imperialism. So I think I have a little bit of unfortunate experience with that. And so this is going to be experiential. It's not going to be like a lot of data, a lot of my talk, not a lot of data, not a lot of stats and things like that. But as most of you know, if you're joining this call, and if you don't know, my son Casey was in the U.S. Army, and he joined in 2000 when Bill Clinton was president. And he joined because of this issue we have in the United States. University is horrendously expensive. It's very unattainable. for people who are in the working class. That's something that we need to talk about too. Is like most people in the United States, even if they're like living from paycheck to paycheck, they're just like one paycheck away from living on the streets, getting their utilities shut off or whatever. They call themselves the middle class. Well, when my son joined the military, we were working class. He was the eldest of four. He thought that joining the military would be a way to alleviate some financial pressure, and his recruiter told them that, of course, he would be able to go to college. He would be able to finish college. He already had 3 years of college in his AA degree. He would be able to finish college using the GI Bill, etc. And so he did, and we weren't thrilled about it, but he was determined to do it. And then, as we know, 9/11 happened, and the U.S., the snake, as Harriet Tubman called it, invaded Afghanistan, which had nothing to do with 9/11. Then they invaded Iraq, which, of course, was the goal of the Bush administration from the beginning, was to get Saddam Hussein. And so Casey went in March of 2004, and he was killed in April of 2004. So even though we were against the war, I didn't really protest it. I wasn't in the networks of where I could, people, I don't live in a town that hosted protests. I live in a town that has 2 prisons and an Air Force base right next door. So it's not a big anti-war town at all here in Vacaville. And I didn't know, like, when protests were happening in Sacramento or San Francisco until they were over. And so I wasn't plugged in to that, into that community. And so after Casey was killed, I got fired from my job. And they said that they needed someone who could be there and be present at all times. And I was ironically working for Health and Human Services for the county of Napa, and they were so uncompassionate after Casey was killed. So I just really had time to start looking into this war. I knew the war was wrong. I knew Afghanistan was wrong. I grew up during the protests of Vietnam. I knew that Vietnam was wrong. And I thought that the U.S. rarely did anything good. But I still thought, maybe if the U.S. actually does something bad, it had good intentions. And so after Casey was killed, I knew that was wrong. And so then in 2005, I camped out at George Bush's ranch in Crawford, Texas. And many people came to know me at that point, even though for the year after Casey was killed until I went to Crawford, I was working really hard in the peace anti-war movement. And so after I went to Crawford, I got a lot of emails from around the world. And this one mother emailed me, and she said, from Iraq, and her son was killed in the same battle Casey was, but he was an Iraqi. And she told me that, Cindy, we don't want to kill your children, but you're occupying our country. And so the one people, I was mad at George Bush, I was mad at Dick Cheney, I was mad at all of his administration. I was angry with the Democrats in Congress who weren't doing anything about it, angry with the Republicans. And the one thing I was never angry at was the people of Iraq, because I understood that the United States was occupying Iraq. Casey understood that. He said that he wasn't going to be able to kill anybody when he got over there, and he was a Humvee mechanic, and he was killed like within a week of getting there. He was forced to go into combat. So what I think is so wonderful about March on the Pentagon is that we are anti-imperialists. We have even though individually we may have some political ties, some candidates we're supporting, as an organization, we recognize that imperialism is the snake, it's the disease, it's the cancer. It doesn't matter if there's a Democrat or a Republican in office, or a Democrat or Republican running. So women in solidarity with each other around the world, creating these networks of mothers, grandmothers, women, and other humans that are anti-imperialist, fighting against U.S. imperialism, I think is the only way that we're going to end it. We're obviously not going to end it by donating to Bernie Sanders, by voting for Bernie Sanders, because he is pro-imperialism. We didn't end it, or the United States didn't end it, by voting for Trump, getting Trump in office, even though, arguably he's probably better than Hillary Clinton would have been if she got in office. So that's another thing, is Hillary Clinton is a woman, but she is very absorbed and, sold out to the patriarchy, to imperialism. She embodies U.S. imperialism as a woman. She's like Golda Meir. She's like Margaret Thatcher. They're women who felt like they had to take on this imperialism and patriarchy to be powerful in this country. And that might be true. And that's a sad thing to say about our country, is that if you want to be in power, you have to be an imperialist. You have to vote for murder. You have to vote for wars. You have to, be sold out to this system. So just because someone's a woman doesn't make them, anti-imperialist or pro-peace or somebody that we should follow. But there are, I think, many women, and Emma's going to talk about this more, mothers have, even though it might not be fair, we still have most of the responsibility for child care, for house care, for the budget, for, getting our children back and forth to school, and usually working at least one job on top of that. So we have all this responsibility. We're the ones, we believe, and have argued, March on the Pentagon, women around the world, even women here in the United States, are the ones who pay a dear price for U.S. imperialism, especially if you have one of the children who you raised to, be a fine, upstanding citizen, join the military, and go off to murder or to be murdered. So I think that that's about all I have to say. If there's any comments or questions, Emma.
Let me take a look. So far we have a lot of people saying hi, and that they're really happy that we're doing this.
Hi, everybody. I have a pillow on my back that has a picture of Casey. People want it. Somebody made that for me. Yeah.
It's a good place for it, supporting you back there.
Yeah. This is an emotional time of year for me, too. This is about when he left for Iraq, and then April 4th will be the 16th anniversary of his death. And, if you're out there, if you're a parent, you understand that that's not something that anybody can ever get over. So, it's something that's always there. You just learn how to live with it.
So far, it doesn't look like we have any questions on Facebook or YouTube. Just to remind everybody that this will be a lot more interesting if we do have questions and engagement from the audience. But maybe yeah.
I have a question. If people have questions, are we bringing them online, or are they just typing their questions out on Facebook?
And then I will read their question. But a reminder to anybody who has found this video from somebody sharing it on Facebook, if somebody shared this on their page or in another group and you just comment on that post, that comment isn't going on the video. So make sure that you're actually in our live March on the Pentagon post and see all of the comments and the viewers there. Then we will see your comments. If you just comment on somebody's share of this, it's been shared a lot of times now, so we won't be able to find all of those. Well, we do have a couple of questions on YouTube. We have one from Dust James, says, what are some strategies that common folks can do to oppose imperialism?
Well, you can join March on the Pentagon and join us for our organizing. We organize locally around issues that come up, but we also organize a yearly event in Washington, D.C., which we're going to be getting on to organize. I think that my opinion is that too much emphasis is put on elections, and especially in a presidential election year, it seems like there's always elections. You know, there's a 24/7, 365-day a year, every year election. If people aren't running, they're raising money to run, they're doing exploratory committees, whatever. And when I say emphasis on elections, I mean emphasis on the duopoly, Democrats and Republicans. People are donating hundreds of millions of dollars to these candidates. And I think they really could, excuse me, I think it really could be going better towards grassroots organizations like March on the Pentagon. For your time and your energy and your resources, I think, should be going into that. I think Dust, if I'm not, I don't know what's wrong with my throat now. If I'm not mistaken, I think Dust has a podcast or a YouTube or something where he gets these issues out. I think a lot of us are involved in alternative media and exposing the fraudulent, duopoly, exposing imperialism. I think there's a lot of things we can do in our communities. I think Emma's going to touch on that. Sometimes it seems like a really big, it doesn't seem like a big problem. It's an enormous problem where, trillions of dollars of U.S. resources go to imperialism, go to active wars, go to maintaining a nuclear arsenal, go to maintaining this billions of dollars the U.S. sends to Israel every year. That comes out of the State Department, but it should be in the defense budget. It goes towards maintaining 1,000 bases around the world, torture sites, whatever. So all this money is consumed by the military-industrial complex resources. I believe the military-industrial complex holds the puppet strings of the politicians. The propaganda media, of course, is just the propaganda arm of the U.S. Military. So it's like a huge problem that that it seems like, so we're just like taking little tiny bites out of it. But I think a lot of energy organizing locally to separate ourselves from U.S. imperialism by things as small as planting your own food, creating your own energy, co-ops for everything from childcare to whatever, but just really organizing workers to fight against capitalism. And when you see someone like Jeff Bezos, who has over $1 trillion in wealth, is that right? Is that right? I can't believe these numbers are just so incomprehensible to me. That is like, maybe like this year we take him on, take one of these capitalist imperialists. And not only does he own all that wealth, but he maintains the cloud for the deep state here in the United States, makes military applications for the military. So, and it's hard to say, let's boycott Boeing because none of us are going to buy jets. But how about if we boycott Amazon? And I think that if millions of us do that, that might make a difference. And one thing I want to plug, because it is tax season, I am a war tax resistor. I haven't paid taxes since my son was killed. As soon as my son was killed, I regretted ever paying taxes because I might not, I funded my own son's murder for one thing, but before that, how much more murder and oppression did I fund while I was paying my taxes to the snake? So, I think a massive war tax resistant movement, and people are so afraid to take on the IRS. But I've taken on the IRS. They say I owe them over $100,000. I don't know where they got that figure from, but I'm still here. I'm still fighting, and there is a risk. Any of the things that we do, there's a risk, but we have to decide within ourselves. Is it more important to me to not use my own hard-earned resources to fund murder, or is it important for me to not go to prison? To me, it's more important. So people have to make it's a moral call. It's your own ethics, looking inside yourself and seeing what you're willing to risk to. But it's not like the IRS. Do you know the IRS? An agent told my attorney who worked for me for free. He said, we're not so upset that she's not paying her taxes because we kind of understand her reasoning, because my son was killed, and like, how can you, they owe me money. And no amount of money that I pay them or they pay me is going to bring my son back, or the millions of people that they kill. So he said, we kind of understand her reasoning, but why does she have to be so vocal about it? So, and my attorney's like, have you heard of Cindy Sheehan? And so yeah, I mean, it's something that the War Tax Resistant Coordinating Committee, I think is WTRCC.org, has more information about that. But I think the more people who are involved in something, the less chance the less risk there is for any kind of prosecution or whatever. And we see what the U.S. does to people, and it's not good. But the U.S. it has been doing this since it's been the United States, and it's going to take a lot of our effort and a lot of putting ourselves at risk to stop it.
We've got a couple of more questions. I think we'll maybe take like 2 or 3 of them before I move on to Randi's video.
And I'll try not to. I'll try not to talk too long.
These should be pretty easy.
But Randi's not here, so there's no Q&A for Randi.
True. So Tom Violet says that they're having a peace congress in Newark, New Jersey. Hi, Tom. And it's being co-organized with Diane Moxley, who will be speaking soon, as well as Jan Weinberg, who's worked with us before.
Right.
And Tom is wondering if in their programming or whatever they're doing for that day, can they mention your son?
Oh, of course.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. And over on Facebook, Mel Rodriguez wants to know when you're going to run, Cindy.
Hey, Mel. Well, I hurt my foot, so I can't run. Oh, you mean run for office? I already did that 3 times. And so I just think that when I ran against Nancy Pelosi in 2008, it was amazing. I think we did really well. Didn't win, but the thing is that we didn't stop her from doing anything. She's so invulnerable to to challenges. I just think that if I do run, I would never run as a Democrat or Republican. That's out. And so I run with Peace and Freedom Party. I'm not saying that people shouldn't run third party or whatever, but to challenge the duopoly. But at the system that we have now, if you don't know that it's rigged by now, then I don't know when you're going to know that it's rigged. And our voices are kept out. And if you notice, I was in the media a lot before I ran against Nancy Pelosi, and that stopped. I've stopped just being in the corporate media, stopped even being on Democracy Now! So they're really good at shutting down voices. So I'm not ruling out ever running for anything again, but I don't have any plans at this point.
John Gold would like to know, what country do you think we might go to war with next?
Um, I think we're at war with every country by now, aren't we? And so, I mean, there's no such thing as a declared war anymore, right? So, I read an appalling statistic, and Lucy is probably going to talk about that. One third of this world is currently under U.S. sanctions. One third of the population of this world. And we know sanctions are an act of war. The U.S. has military bases on on every continent, in almost every country. So, yeah, it's hard to say who will start shooting next, but I've seen a lot of possibility of actually a military invasion of Venezuela. In fact, Maduro said that yesterday, that it seems like the U.S. is ramping up for a military invasion. But just want to say March on the Pentagon's already against it. March on the Pentagon doesn't believe in humanitarian interventions. We believe in sovereignty of each nation. We might not be for the leaders of these countries, or we may be, but we certainly are against any kind of U.S. military. But we're never going to say, President X is an evil dictator, but the U.S. shouldn't invade. No, well, we're never going to say anything like that.
We have a lot of great conversation happening on over on YouTube of folks that are already boycotting Amazon, so that's nice to see. Yes. I do that too.
And let's make it a thing. Let's make it a thing. Let's have a organized boycott if there isn't already, and just say, Jeff Bezos, we're coming after you. Dude. Yeah. We went after Washington Post in our Rage Against the War Machine last year, and he, of course, is the owner of it. So let's just say we're going to bring down one more criminal capitalist a year.
Yes.
And he is a big one.
And then we also have a comment on Facebook asking, and I don't know how much you know about this, Cindy, asking a little bit about 5G, and if we agree that that's a form of an act of war, and about raising awareness about that.
Yeah, I actually don't know a lot about it. Emma, if you know more, you can say something. I think that there's a lot of electromagnetic energy flowing around us all the time. So
there is. I'm not an expert on 5G, but it's something I've been trying to.
But maybe whoever asked that, maybe they can share with us more information. Yes. Maybe they can be a guest on one of our next community conference calls to inform us about it.
Yes, it's definitely something that I think more people need to pay attention to, kind of in the same way that ordering from Amazon became something that people just started doing out of convenience. They accepted it, and then it became normal, so it's hard for people to stop doing it now because they feel like they can't go to a store like they used to.
Right. It's almost impossible without... It's almost impossible to do stuff without Walmart or Amazon. Mm-hmm. But we really need to, and I actually wrote an entire book about, and there's a lot of suggestions, and if people want to send us their email, I can email them the PDF of it. It's called Myth America, 20 Greatest Myths of the Robber Class in the Case for Revolution. And it has a lot of suggestions on how we can, use our individual energy, community energy, organized energy to resist imperialism and capitalism. So if we can gather emails, I'll send everybody a free PDF.
That's great that you offer it from free and don't force people to buy it on Amazon.
Yeah, I do have stuff on Amazon. I just got a check from Amazon yesterday for royalties. I was like, what? I still do have some stuff on Amazon, but I would never ask people to buy my stuff on Amazon.
Mm-hmm. That's good. But yeah, just like we've accepted Amazon into our lives for the sake of convenience, I think that's what people are mostly going to do with 5G if they don't know what's going on. Right. But you were right, there's electromagnetic frequencies all around us, especially us right now, because we're live streaming, and it's everywhere, unfortunately.
At least we're not sharing the coronavirus.
True.
At least we're being responsible
Yes.
and having
Yes.
an online forum.
Yes. But the main concern with 5G is it's a newer kind of frequency, because so much information can be packed into it that it can't actually travel far, like the kinds of frequencies that we have right now. So they need to install towers everywhere to make it work. And we know that with the closer you are to the equipment that is emanating these things, the more damaging it is. So there's concern that it's going to be outside of schools, outside of people's houses, and it hasn't been studied thoroughly. So it's purely
even
for profit.
Even electrical, even wires for electricity, those big ones are really bad to live under. Higher incidence of cancer and stuff under those things. Let's just put our money together and buy an island.
Yes, can we?
And we'll all go on the island. I even have a name for it. It's called Pacifista. Ooh. We go and just have this island and we have to stay and fight. People who know the score, we need to stay and fight. So, yes. Anything else, or should we go on to Randi's?
Well, I guess I'll plug one thing real quick, because it made me, the book that you mentioned, and you're probably aware of Derek Brose, who came to our first March in the Pentagon. He's also an author, and he recently made a documentary about 5G, but a little bit before that came out, his new book came out that I had the pleasure of editing, and it's called How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State, and it's full of tons of recommendations on how to, back away from the constant tracking and to connect with people who have the same morals as you in this way and kind of live in community more. So that's a good resource too for doing that, because even all of those little things are actually a way to resist imperialism, because you're just not taking part in the system. So that's also important.
Yeah, definitely it is.
I think we will head into Randi's video now, if that sounds okay to you, Cindy.
Okay, I have a little intro to her first. Okay. So Randi Nord is a Mint Press news staff writer, and I got this off of Mint Press. So she is also co-founder of Geopolitics Alert, where she covers U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East with a special focus on Yemen. So here's a picture of Randi.
Thanks. Okay, so I'm going to play this video that was a previously recorded video of Randi, and please let me know in the comments wherever you're watching this if the volume is too high or too low or whatever. I'm going to mute Cindy and I while this plays, and then we'll come back in. And if you do have any questions, obviously not for Randi since her video isn't live, maybe there's something that you still might have a question about that Cindy and I could try to answer before we move into our next speaker. So without further ado, here is a pre-recorded video of Randi Nord.
Since I'm born and raised in the United States, since its inception, the United States has portrayed itself as a defender of human rights at home and globally, but for over 3 years, the children of Yemen have had to experience firsthand the worst oppression the U.S. has to offer. According to the Legal Center for Rights and Development, by the war's 1,200th day, over 14,000 civilians were killed by coalition airstrikes. Of those civilian deaths, over 2,000 were women, while over 3,000 were children. And that's not including injuries or wounded. The vast majority of these lives cut short are not from ground fighting, but rather due to airstrikes from the coalition. The United States plays a key role facilitating the Saudi-led coalition's ability to carry out these airstrikes in several ways. According to Human Rights Watch, Washington approved more than $20 billion worth of military sales to Saudi Arabia in 2015 alone. 3 U.S. arms sales in 2015 and 2016, worth nearly $3 billion, involved replenishing Saudi weaponry specifically for their campaign in Yemen. According to the Center for International Policy, U.S. companies Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and General Dynamics were involved in 80 different deals with Saudi Arabia as of 2017. These deals included over 7,000 precision-guided missiles, 6,700 air-to-ground missiles, 7,800 general purpose, 2,000-pound bombs, as well as countless attack helicopters and fighter jets to facilitate the bombings. Not only that, but the United States also provides refueling for fighter jets used to drop America's very own laser-guided munitions. One of the most horrendous attacks came last month when Saudi warplanes bombed a school bus full of children, killing dozens on board. Saudi officials initially defended the strike as a legitimate military action. Various outlets reported that the weapon used to strike the school bus was, in fact, a 227-kilogram laser-guided bomb made by U.S. manufacturer Lockheed Martin. The U.S. routinely skirts the blame for its own involvement in this violence against children. When Vox News asked a spokesperson for the U.S. Central Command whether or not a U.S. bomb was used in the school bus attack, Army Major Josh Jacques said, "We may never know if the munition was one that the United States sold to them." Estimates of the damage vary, but the International Committee of the Red Cross in Sada received the bodies of 29 children under the age of 15 and treated another 50, including 30 children. As for the refueling of warplanes in exchange in March between Army General Joseph Votel and the top U.S. military official for the Middle East and Senator Elizabeth Warren during a Senate Armed Services Committee hearing supports that. General, does the CENTCOM track the purposes of the munitions it is refueling? In other words, where a U.S. refueled aircraft is going, what targets it strikes, and the result of the mission? Senator, we do not. The Saudi coalition has also used internationally banned cluster munitions on at least 60 occasions, many of which are made in the U.S. According to the Legal Center for Rights and Development, 222 children casualties were documented due to cluster munitions. The bomb that destroyed a residential building in Yemen's capital in the summer of 2017, which killed 16 civilians and wounded 17 more, including 5-year-old Buthania, whose photograph went viral in the aftermath of the strike, was made in the U.S., according to Amnesty International. Amnesty's arms experts analyzed remnants of the weapons and indeed found it had clear markings matching U.S.-made components commonly used in laser-guided airdrop bombs. This particular airstrike hit several homes in Sana'a, severely damaging 3 of them and killing 7 children, including all 5 of Buthania's brothers and sisters. 8 other children sustained injuries, including a 2-year-old boy who lost both of his parents. In regards to the wedding massacre in April of 2018, a photograph shows remains of a wing assembly of an American-made GBU-12 Paveway 2 guided bomb, which resulted in 33 killed and 55 injured. More than 90 civilians, including 25 children, died in March of 2016. Saudi airstrike on a market. A month later, 10 more children perished in another strike at a school in Sada. The same day, 5 children were killed in a bomb smashed into a hospital in Hajjah. In regards to a Saudi coalition air raid on a funeral in 2016, high estimates suggest over 155 civilians were killed and over 500 others wounded. A UN report about that attack said the second airstrike, which occurred 3 to 8 minutes after the first airstrike, almost certainly resulted in more casualties to the already wounded and first responders. Human Rights Watch identified the munitions used in the airstrike as a 500-pound laser-guided bombs manufactured by the United States, called on Washington then to suspend arms sales to Saudi Arabia. Although it isn't certain the exact number of children killed in the wedding and funeral attacks, we can reasonably conclude that many children were present at these events, since they were purely civilian in nature, as are many other similar attacks on homes, markets, buses, schools, and so on and so forth. These figures are without even mentioning the countless attacks on schools, airports, seaports, and other institutions children rely on for life. In fact, the targeting of spaces where children are most likely to be present, such as in a home or school, have resulted in 4.5 million children not attending school. Rather than acting as a passive observer, this evidence makes it clear that the United States is complicit in these horrendous attacks on Yemen's children and continues to act without impunity unless something happens soon. Thank you.
All right. Cindy and I, we are back on the live stream. That was the end of Randi's video. Is there anything that you wanted to add to that, Cindy? I think.
Your volume is down.
Oh. Okay, that's as high as up as I can get mine.
Huh? Because I could hear you. Oh, wait.
Oh, you took out your headphones.
I took the time to I took the time of Randy's video to go get some personal urgencies taken care of, and I forgot to put my headphones back on.
That's okay. That's better because I was like, what happened?
See, so I don't really have anything to add. That we're just like really pleased that Randi accepted our invitation, but then she was not able to join us live. And Yemen has been something that we worked really hard on last year, exposing what was happening. So it's like a forgotten kind of genocide that's happening right now. So I'm really glad that we were able to include that today in our little forum here.
It's unfortunate that we're in a place in history right now when things like that can be forgotten. It's kind of mind-blowing that, and it's not it's a horrible thing that's happening, but there's horrible things happening all over the place that are completely forgotten about right now. Especially when it doesn't find its way into the mainstream media cycle. Most people.
I read an article today, something about Americans don't care about war because it's not happening to them. And so I think that that's true, for one thing. Mm-hmm. And it's like there's been so many questions in the Democratic debates about how is healthcare going to be paid for, but not one about how is war going to be paid for. Mm-hmm. And so it's just so far removed from the average American, war and all, imperialism. But that's, what part of our job is to say the reason like the United States is such a shithole country is because of all the money it spends, all the resources it uses. And one thing that a lot of people are afraid to say, and I'm not too afraid to say it, is that, yes, I've been to Cuba, and so I know that their education system is wonderful. People aren't starving there. There's no homeless. Their health care system is like, if something ever happened to me that was, terminal or whatever, that might be when I would move to Cuba so I could be taken care of in their healthcare system. However, we all want these things in the United States, and well, to a certain degree, many of us want these things, but we can't have nice things in the United States while we're murdering, thousands and thousands of people, oppressing thousands and thousands of people, or helping Israel or Saudi Arabia do the same thing. Mm-hmm. So that's something that we really is like, do we deserve all these wonderful social programs when we're allowing our country to do all this murder in our name? Mm-hmm. So...
Okay, I am going to head over to Skype and call our next guests, which will be Madelyn Hoffman and Diane Moxley. I believe I can keep you up on the screen, Cindy, if you want to start introducing them while I get them joined in on the call. I don't think you'll hear anything when I do that, but this part is what I haven't done before, so we'll see. So why don't you start introducing them, and we might end up interrupting you with them, but hopefully not.
Okay. Well, our next guest, speaking about women and alternative electoral politics under U.S. imperialism. I can still hear you tip-tapping.
Oh, okay.
But it's not bothering me.
Sorry.
I just want to let you know. So our next guests are two members of March on the Pentagon. As a matter of fact, they're both on our board of directors. We have women and alternative electoral politics under U.S. imperialism. Crap, I can hear myself. Can you hear me okay still?
I can hear
Okay,
you. Madelyn, I just got her on the call, and I think that was a
okay,
little bit
Madeline.
of feedback.
Okay, yeah, I got some feedback. So Madeline was executive director of the Grassroots Environmental Organization, GREO, from 1983 to 1998, where she worked with the 1900s seems so long ago, don't they? Where she worked with grassroots citizen groups and communities in New Jersey to clean toxic chemical pollution and oppose new polluting facilities. From 2000 to 2018, she was executive director of the 63-year-old grassroots peace organization, working. It doesn't say what the peace organization was. It was Peace Action, right, Madeline? Okay. Peace Action. Since June, Madeline has worked with the Green Party of New Jersey on an agenda that combines work for a clean environment with work for peace. Madeline is, I said, on the board of directors of March on the Pentagon, member of the U.S. Peace Council, and also a member of the Green Council for the Green Party of New Jersey. She is an adjunct professor of political science and public speaking and has traveled as a peacemaker to Afghanistan, Palestine, Tunisia, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Syria, Colombia, and Venezuela. And very impressive CV there. And with her will be Diane Moxley. Diane is an activist and an attorney. As a member of the Green Party of New Jersey, she is in a state leadership capacity on the Green Council. She embraces the Green Party platform of people, planet, and peace over profit. Diane was a legal services attorney in Newark, New Jersey for over 14 years. She has been involved with activism in New Jersey and across the country, including getting money out of politics, fighting pipelines and fossil fuels, advocating for health care for all, fighting for immigrants' rights, and economic justice. She has stood against racism, imperialism, the military-industrial complex, mass incarceration, and more. Diane currently organizes with Extinction Rebellion, with a focus on environmental justice communities, and the Peace Congress in New Jersey. She is on the board of directors of March on the Pentagon. She is also a member of the U.S. Peace Council as well as a member of the Socialist Party. So two very accomplished, wonderful, committed, dedicated peace and social justice activists will be, and good friends of ours and mine are joining us now.
Okay, I've got Madelyn and Diane up on the screen with you. If you've muted yourselves, Diane or Madelyn, can you unmute? It looks like Madelyn might still be muted.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
There we go.
Excellent.
Oh,
Excellent.
and we've got Madelyn. Okay, so I've got the two of you up on the live stream screen, so I'll just mute myself and hand it off to you two, okay?
Okay. Good to see you all.
Right. Hi. Am I in the screen or just on a little square on the top there? For me, I only see myself in the square. It's all right.
On the live stream, I see your whole face. It's you and Diane's face.
Yeah, I can't hear you. Anyway,
you guys,
all right.
I'm muted right now, but you guys, I can see both of you on the screen, but I think right now it was just you, but I was seeing you and Diane. So
okay.
You're talking.
All right, whatever. It's fine. Yes, and you can hear me all right.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
All right, I will repeat. My name is Madelyn Hoffman, and in addition to those things that were read to you by Cindy, I'm also in this particular time, at this particular moment, I'm running for U.S. Senate as a Green Party candidate in New Jersey, which means this topic that I was asked to speak on, alternate electoral politics and imperialism, is perfect for what I have done and what I am doing currently. And I thought that I would speak first for a few minutes and then turn the microphone over to Diane, my colleague and friend, and that I would speak from my own personal experience as a candidate 2 years ago, campaigning hard on the issue of, or against imperialism and these imperialist wars that the United States is involved in, and also comment some on what previous speakers have said, because for years I was an activist and not a politician, or not somebody involved in electoral politics, and I can see and I believe firmly that both have to happen at the same time for one or the other to be effective. It is clear that there is no anti-war party in the US Congress. Cindy mentioned that. I will emphasize that again. Neither the Republicans nor the Democrats are anti-war. If we just think back to a couple of months ago in the State of the Union address, when the Democrats had been going hard after Donald Trump on impeachment, but when Juan Guaido, the self-selected president of Venezuela, appeared in the State of the Union address, members of both political parties stood up and cheered. And that right there, in that scene, in that particular moment, we see everything that's wrong with U.S. imperialism and the electoral arenas meshed together. Both political parties support a $730 billion or more military budget. Both political parties support any discussion of regime change. And also, the last time, and it was at right about the same time, Donald Trump said, well, we need to increase the sanctions on the country of Iran. And so a couple of days later, there was a resolution passed by Congress that said no to war, no to military intervention in Iran, but said nothing about the economic sanctions, which are in themselves an act of war. So we don't have a voice in Congress. And if we do, if there are a couple of people who raise their voices against these wars, they're quickly shouted out, quickly erased. They're quickly, someone else jumps right in and carries the narrative somewhere else. And I just will throw a shout out here for the one candidate, Democratic Party candidate, who's still in the race. This is an objective statement, not a show of support for her in any way politically, but she's a woman that's left in the race. She's a Democrat. She's very much anti-war, and her name is Tulsi Gabbard. She's not mentioned by anybody. She's not even included in the debates. So there is what appears to be, along with all the other rigging of the primaries, which we've all been able to watch, unfortunately, close up and personal, there's also the desire to keep the anti-war voices out. And so this is why it's really important for us to have alternative methods, alternative electoral methods of raising the issues. And I'll sit here today and tomorrow and the next day and say that if I don't win, if the Green Party doesn't win in terms of actually getting the most votes, the Green Party wins by putting forward a point of view that is consistent with the anti-war movement's point of view, that's side by side with the anti-war movement in the United States and in New Jersey, and that tells the truth about what the U.S. government is doing and has been doing. And, I remember Dwight D. Eisenhower saying it, warning us against the military-industrial complex, conservative that he was, right? Way back around 1960, he warned us about the long tentacles of the military-industrial complex. And then Martin Luther King in 67, exactly 1 year before he was assassinated, April 4th, 1967, saying that the greatest purveyor of violence in the world was his own country, the United States. Unfortunately, nothing has changed. in that regard, whether they are economic sanctions or military maneuvers. Cindy, I remember I just read today or yesterday that there was I don't remember what vehicle it was, but something was confiscated that came in from Colombia with weapons, to be used against Venezuela. The level, the arrogance to which this imperialism has been taken is off the charts. I mean, we used to have this occurring all the time, covertly through the CIA. Now it's done overtly, and there's not enough resistance. There's not enough resistance internationally or within the country to stop it. The peace movement finally got the Congress to say that the war in Yemen was unconstitutional and illegal, and finally got the Congress to vote to stop selling weapons to Saudi Arabia, and that was vetoed by the president. So there are many people who see what's happening with these imperialistic wars. They see the destruction taking place. It's not only of communities and the deaths of individuals, but the eradication of cultures. I mean, look at the indigenous up in Canada or the indigenous in South America fighting for their lives and their territory and their land and their way of life against pipelines and Roundup and things that come from the United States, the weapons of destruction, if you will. We need to take action on that. And I'm not sure what's on my screen. There we go. I think I probably have spoken for 10 minutes, and so I will stop and turn it over to Diane Moxley to speak more about the role of what we need to do as an alternative to the electoral process currently.
Yeah, hi guys, can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Yeah, and as Madelyn was talking about, we both ran in 2018 on the Green Party line. Madelyn was running for U.S. Senate in New Jersey, and I was running for Congress in Congressional District 7. And I know there are many on the left that aren't so keen on electoral politics, but a lot of us Greens, we're behind the scenes, the Energizer bunnies, behind the scenes organizing actions and rallies and running for office. So I like to do both in tandem. Sometimes we'll even be doing actions while we're running for office. I think that's perfectly legit and fine. And I believe alternative parties need to be out there because we have to push the narrative, as Madelyn was saying, and as was said earlier. We have, a corporate-controlled, military-loving duopoly. It's really just one party, and we can, really help educate the public with our campaigns. And I know, I think I can speak for Madelyn. When we were running 100% legit, strong, full force campaigns. And we actually had our voices heard in New Jersey. I think at times we were scaring the crap out of our opponents and hopefully educating through, whatever, by any means necessary to educate our communities. So that's what I looked at this as. And, in blue states like New Jersey, there is a neoliberal stronghold that is 100% pro-empire, pro-imperialism. And our job is to tell our people and our communities about what the candidates we're opposing are really doing behind the scenes, because we know we have corporate controlled media, that is also controlled by the duopoly. So, Madelyn ran in 2018 against Senator Menendez, who is corrupt as hell and never met a country he could conquer. I mean, he's just beyond tyrannical. And right now she's running against Cory Booker, who is a 100% lockstep neoliberal. And for my race, I ran against an incumbent Republican who was probably kind of ineffective, but the candidate he was running against is a absolute neoliberal, former State Department. He was listed as one of the carpetbaggers that were dispersed throughout the country that were also labeled the CIA Democrats. So I felt 100% obligated to run against a campaign like that. And I have no problem. I'll do it again. I'm not doing it in 2020, but I have no problem doing it again. Because as I said, we had local news, we had media attention. My campaign even had a spot with three Green congressional candidates, as well as Jill Stein mentioned in the New York Times. So whatever we have to do to get our voices heard. And, for me, it happens to be the Green Party. But as Madelyn was saying, there's lots of different other options out there. I also am a dual member with the Socialist Party. Whatever avenue you're going to work with electoral politics, we have to push these messages. And, the Green Party has a strong anti-imperialist message. It's in our platform. As I said, with how we wear multiple hats at once, we tend to be the organizers. A lot of us were involved last year with the No NATO actions in DC. A lot of us were involved with the No to Trump military parade. And of course, we're so proudly involved with the March on the Pentagon movement. And as our colleague Tom Violet had said earlier, when he reached out to Cindy Sheehan, we organize events locally. We're organizing a peace congress and taking these actions to right to the streets, to the people who are on the front lines, as we were all talking about. When we have a pumped up military budget, the people hurt, the people suffer. So we have communities locally to us, and for closest to us is Newark, who their residents still don't have adequate drinking water in much of the city. And if it wasn't for activists pushing that issue, there'd be nothing even started. We're also doing an International Women's Day event tomorrow in downtown Newark. And this is about women activists who are fighting the wars at home and abroad. So it's not your typical, white feminist rah-rah event. We're bringing in all of our wonderful activists and organizers that we connect with. And, I'm just going to say with 2020, I know we got to wrap it up and take some questions. Hopefully there's some questions. But, why we need alternative voices. In 2020, we have the closest thing of a front runner, the closest candidate who actually is getting any attention, who's a lefty, is Bernie Sanders. But, we have to push him. And if there's not other options, he's getting there, he's evolving, but he's absolutely not there. As Madelyn mentioned, we have Tulsi Gabbard, who is getting pretty much completely ignored. But I want, for our Bernie supporters, you have to be out there pushing your candidate. He may be hesitant to say that there needs to be regime change in Venezuela, but the language that he talks is, he using the language, I think his specific words were he called Maduro a vicious tyrant. So you're keeping the door open to military action. We know there's horrific sanctions globally, but when you use language like that, you're keeping the door open to killer sanctions and other types of proxy wars. So, I mean, I would advocate people, of course, I'm Green Party and Socialist Party. Check us out for 2020. Part of the thing is to really have actions that, effective. See, I'm so much of an activist, everything becomes an action. So elections become actions.
Yes, they are.
But to have our some type of legitimacy. I follow the Green Party, and obviously I'm a member of the Green Party. In 2016, Jill Stein was on the ballot in 45 states, and she had the ability to be a counted write-in in 3 states. So that enabled a alternative party candidate to be voted for in enough states that it actually has some type of push. So I'd say, check us out, and we have to fight on all fronts. And I think most of us fight on all fronts simultaneously. A lot of work to be done.
Thank you so much, Diane and Madelyn. I'm going to give Emma a chance to look for questions and stuff like that. And I just want to say that as March on the Pentagon, we're a 501c3, so we can't endorse candidates, but we can endorse positions. And like you said, we've been working with the Green Party ever since we started. And the many members of the Green Party, or my party, Peace and Freedom Party, here in California, we're the ones that are organizing all the events against war, against police oppression, against sanctions, against whatever. We're on the forefront organizing all these things. And the one thing about Bernie Sanders is that he might say some really good things domestically, but his foreign policy, he's a liberal imperialist, and so we can't what I see most people doing, I'm not saying anybody here or anybody on this call, but what I see most people doing is try to separate that from Bernie Sanders, trying to separate the fact that he's an imperialist from Bernie Sanders. And to me, that has to be like this, it's like we said before, how can we have universal health care, universal education, while we have the biggest defense budget of more than 10 or 12 countries put together? And so that's just something that I think that alternative politics and including you in this, in this forum for International Women's Day, getting women into alternative politics, I think is super important, and that's why your voices and our voices are included in this. Emma, do we have any questions for?
We do.
Our dear women here.
We didn't until right now.
I have something I want to add to Cindy's comments,
Sure.
But I'll take after the question, or do you want me to add that now?
You can add that now, since Cindy just made the comments.
All right, it'll be very short and very relevant, germane to what Cindy said. That is when I. And when I was running in 2018, people said to me over and over again, why are you bringing up the wars and the military budget? It's a diversion from the real issues at hand. And I translated that into, it's a diversion because both Democrats and Republicans support it, but it's not a diversion. It's the essence of everything that's going on in this country right now and in the world, in the trillions of dollars expended on war, destroying entire communities, not going into education, infrastructure, job creation, healthcare, and all the rest here at home.
Absolutely.
Yes. I guess before I go into this question, I just wanted to say nice shirt, Diane.
It's our uniform.
One of these things is not like the other. Madeline, where's your shirt?
Well, I wore gray.
Okay,
But
okay.
I didn't think I should speak as a candidate wearing a shirt. I was
okay.
concerned about that.
It just somehow happened. I don't know. Okay. So over on YouTube, there is a question for Madeline. Matthew Scolar asks, as senator, how would you get military spending down and encourage your colleagues to do the same?
Oh, well, now that's quite the question, but I'll revert to the real Green New Deal, because after the elections of 2018, the Green New Deal got front and center coverage, but it did not include anything at all about challenging the military budget. So what was happening, you can't do one without the other. So I would argue, as senator and as activists too, that what's absolutely essential is to do what Cindy did before, which is to couple the environment and the military. If we're going to do anything about climate change, we have to acknowledge that the military is the world's biggest polluter. And we have to acknowledge that if we don't end these wars, we're not going to be able to combat climate change. And if we don't make that acknowledgement, and we don't think about the people on the other end of the wars, if we don't think about the indigenous in Canada on the other end of the pipeline, or the people in South America on the other end of Roundup and agribusiness, if we don't think about the people in the Amazon, the indigenous standing up for their lives, we're going to lose everything. We're going to lose everything. So what I would do is argue as passionately as I can for the need to start pulling those resources out of the military, out of death and destruction, and into the positive eco-socialism, if you will, addressing the environment and addressing the people and the cultures and everyone, respecting cultures, respecting differences, not exploiting them for war and profit.
Thank you for that very thorough answer. We have another question on YouTube from Matthew as well. This one is for Diane. Diane, in your opinion, what has been the biggest win for the Green Party on the front of ending imperialism?
Well, because we have limited power, what we're doing is educating and pushing candidates. So as Madeline, for instance, was just talking about the Green New Deal, the Sunrise Green New Deal and some of the New Deals that were pushed by Democrats mention no military cuts whatsoever. But if the Green Party is out there, or whichever alternative party you prefer, but a party that is anti-imperialist, we can push the issue, which then magically appears in, say, for instance, Bernie Sanders' Green New Deal. So first we had a Sunrise Green New Deal, which was also being pushed by some establishment Democrats. And then voila, I think it was maybe about 6 months ago, maybe a little bit earlier than that, Bernie Sanders' Green New Deal, which yes, I'm a Green. So I respect some people who are trying to push candidates more to the left, but I want to be clear that I am just speaking to what we can do is push the candidates that are out there to have platforms that are starting to do things like address the military budget. So Bernie Sanders' Green New Deal now talks about cuts to the military, it talks about eco-socialism, and it talks about things like worker-owned co-ops. And if we weren't out there pushing these ideas in a more left perspective, then our mainstream candidates would completely ignore it. They know, Bernie Sanders knows that if he were to get the nomination, he's not going to win with Democrats alone, which one day maybe the entire establishment Democrats would get. that you also need the disengaged voters and you need the independent voters to come on board. So we got to push them to the left. And, that's just one example how if we're out there doing our work, we're having unheard voices heard that aren't represented in the electorate right now.
Also, my question would be like, so like you said, Diane, the Green Party has very little power, political power, because of the system that we're in, right? We had a proportional representation instead of winner take all, third parties would have more of a fair the people would be more fairly represented, right? And so we don't have that. So like I said earlier, while we were getting you guys on the phone, there have been a couple dozen questions in the debates, the Democrat debates, which, like, to me are hilarious entertainment, by the way. The
I can't bear
just a couple of them.
Yeah. I know. How are you going to pay for health care and not question about how are you going to pay for the military? Where's all this money coming from for the military? So to address this question to activists and alternative political activists also, or candidates or whatever, is kind of missing the big picture. We're the ones out there fighting against it every day of our lives, and these people who get on the stage are the ones who have been for decades voting for it, promoting it. Even if their rhetoric might be a little closer to us right now, the history has been a promotion, fighting in the wars, doing whatever they can. And so the problem is, I see, and you guys probably see this too, is that people don't vote for the Green Party or the Peace and Freedom Party or, whatever kind of the Socialist Party if they get on the ballot or whatever, because they say they have no chance of winning. Of course we don't have no chance of winning, because you're not voting for us, because you're voting for these imperialists, these warmongers, these people who can't string two words together in a sentence. You're voting for them instead because they have a chance of winning. So you put these people into office and we, the people, lose like 100% of the time. The war machine wins and we lose.
And if you look back to, say, 1996, when Ralph Nader first ran for office, I remember him saying, because I ran with him in New Jersey in 1996, he said then, if you continue to vote for the lesser of two evils, you're still voting for evil, and it gets lesser and lesser. And if you look at 1996 and 2016, I mean, we have the poster child in the White House right now. If we'd had ranked choice voting from 1996 on, and people could have ranked their choices, we probably would have had a far different outcome. It's just that every 4 years or every 2 years, people give in to that lesser of two evils feeling, and it's really taken us down a really negative road. So we need ranked choice voting, like the people in Maine do, and we'll see what happens there this time. It's on the federal level for the first time. We'll see what happens with Senate candidate Lisa Savage with ranked choice voting. But you're absolutely right, Cindy. Absolutely right.
So we're asking our activists and our candidates to have courage and to be bold, but the voters and the majority, like they might say that, oh, like the Bernie supporters, I'm never voting for Clinton, but then they get to the voting booth and they're like, Clinton. So we are running a little bit late. Is there anything urgent for Madelyn and Diane?
No.
I'm just going to back up and support what Madelyn said about ranked choice voting. We're going to watch Maine this year, and I think progressive Dems and independents can work together to push their states to have ranked choice voting, and that's hopefully going to be a way of making some breakthroughs.
Great. Awesome. So thank you, Madelyn and Diane. And if you want to go into the comments on this video and post the way people can get a hold of you, obviously if they're on Facebook, they can get a hold of you because we're just right there. So, okay. So thank you so much. We're going to be bringing on Lisa Davis. And don't forget, we have a board meeting this Tuesday.
Okay.
Yes. Talk to you both on Tuesday.
I did. Thank you for the reminder. Bye. Bye, Diane. Bye, everyone.
Bye, Madelyn. Bye, Diane.
Thank you.
Yep.
So while Emma's getting Lisa Davis on, I'm going to read this quote I pulled up from Lenin, not Lenin, but Vladimir Lenin. He wrote it, and that's one of my favorite things to say. He wrote it in 1919. He said, "Down with this foul lie. There is no equality, nor can there be, of oppressed and oppressor, exploited and exploiter. There is no real freedom, nor can there be, so long as women are handicapped by men's legal privileges, so long as there is no freedom of the worker from the yoke of capital." So women, he had stated in other writings too, that women are doubly oppressed under capitalism, but also women of color, you might say, are triply oppressed. So we're going to get on. I think my problem was I couldn't see when I was hi, I can see Lisa. I'm going to introduce you, Lisa, then we're going to put you on, okay? Thank you so much. You can see Lisa. Lisa Davis is a longtime strong community activist in New Jersey. So New Jersey has been well supported and has been well represented in our forum, who has been passionately committed to the Black liberation struggle for over 30 years. She started out at the age of 19, being the youngest person ever elected to serve on the Democratic County Committee in her hometown, but soon found a stronger and truer voice in the grassroots movement of the people's struggles, and has made a conscientious choice to stand with the people ever since. From being actively involved in the struggle to end apartheid to fighting to end police brutality and stop and frisk, Lisa vows to remain committed to the struggles of oppressed people everywhere. Today, she is a member of the People's Organization for Progress, the vice chair of the Black is Back Coalition, BIBC, and chair of its healthcare working group, which is tasked with the mission of establishing an advocacy network of revolutionary people who are involved in healthcare, be it naturopathic or allopathic, and who are committed to challenging the paradigm of this current racist for-profit medical system. Absolutely. And whereas she commends the Black liberation struggle for being on the forefront of fighting against the abuses of a racist judicial and law enforcement society, she is adamant that we must become equally as vocal about the devastating effects of structural racism in medicine. Thank you, Lisa. Thanks for joining us. We're going to turn the forum over to you, my dear.
You're going to, me? Well, again,
You're on.
I want to say thank you. Me, I go. I want to say thank you so very much for having this forum and for this opportunity. And as I'm listening to that bio, I'm like, I need to update it, but it still contains a lot of very important information. And I just want to say that the Black is Back Coalition, its full title is the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations. And that's just very important to always keep those issues up in the forefront of anything that we're doing. And this is such an important conversation that we're having now. And it's interesting that as you were reading the bio and talking about health, I'm reading things now about New York City on alert and an emergency alert because of the coronavirus. And so many of these things all tie into this current for-profit colonialist system that we have and that we really must challenge. We must challenge it. We must stop it. We must fight it. It does not serve us. It literally does not serve us at all. And I have learned that with every every part of my being in terms of being on the front lines of the Black liberation struggle, which initially started because of, I shouldn't say started, because I was always somebody who was very, very proud of who I am, my culture, my heritage. I was always very proud of that. But I could not understand the system so well in which these things operate. And I would learn that it was not just enough to fight on the issues of racism, which is definitely very important, but the whole system upon which this country and which colonialism and Eurocentric imperialism has been founded must be challenged, must be struck down. And we have to think in terms of systems, because as a Black person, I don't want to replace white oppression with Black oppression. I don't want a Black face as the head of US imperialism or capitalism, which was literally founded upon oppressing people and killing them for profit. And then the system of racism began to be created around it to justify all of these horrible practices that were being committed against people, people who didn't look like the controlling power at the time, which, white people, white power. So,
is that is that your presentation?
Well, I mean,
you have a little bit more time if you have some more, if you have anything else to add, or we can just have a discussion with questions now if you want.
Definitely, that we could. I'm sorry, that we could have like an open discussion about.
Yeah, there is an open discussion. Yeah.
Definitely, because again, like I said, the issue of imperialism, it must be challenged. We are literally going on 20 years of open warfare, not covert, but open war. And so many of the American people, it's like, because they don't see these wars, they are just not thinking about them. It has been removed from their consciousness. And when we look at how this country moves against Black people, and now we're seeing them doing it more in terms of targeting immigration, and definitely with what has happened with the indigenous people of this country, they've been just about eradicated. And then we see that they still are never given the stage or the proper respect or the due that they are deserved. They're never given that at all. And yet we have this concept of American exceptionalism that just continues to pervade so much of the thinking of people in this country. And that has got to change. It's like what they have done to the African people in this country. Well, we really started with Africa. They seek to just spread it far abroad. What happened to the indigenous people? They're taking it and they're invading these other countries. And, we as people who live in this country must raise our voices against what is going on. We must change our mindset. We have to penetrate that mindset, because embracing American patriotism is embracing madness. You literally have to believe in madness in order to not challenge this.
Right.
And we have to challenge it. It is the responsibility of everyone who lives in this country, if they certainly have a conscience, to challenge it and to change. We have to penetrate the mindset. We have to penetrate how people look at things. We really do. Like, I'll just give you one example. I saw something, and this is not even getting into that whole thing about the elections, but maybe we even should. But I saw that Elizabeth Warren, now that she is no longer going to continue to run, I saw something about, how sad it is that there are no other women running in the campaign. And I'm like, yeah, but there is. Tulsi Gabbard is still in the presidential campaign. She's still running. And the comments that I was getting was really atrocious. It resorted to calling her names, or she's not this, she's not that. And I'm like, everybody who is going to participate in these elections should have the right to participate in the debates and all of that kind of stuff. You can't just continue to not see people. You just can't continue to eradicate their existence. You can't continue to eradicate their voice, and she does have a very important voice. But even if she didn't, she should still be acknowledged and should still be allowed to participate in the so-called quote unquote democracy, and her hands should not be tied.
Well, that also discounts the women that are running for president and not the Democrat or Republican Party, you know? So it's like, there was just a headline the other day. Somebody wrote an article about the run against Nancy Pelosi in San Francisco, and a Democrat, a Bernie-crat came in second. We have top two in California, so it doesn't matter what party you're in, the top two move to the general election. So in San Francisco, they both happen to be Democrats. The headline was, "This is the first genuine challenge to Nancy Pelosi from the left in 30 years. Well, I ran against her in 2008. But I was a Democrat. Exactly. I wasn't a Republican, and I got more votes than she did. So I think it's shutting down women's voices. It's shutting down alternative voices. You know, it's just like pretending that other people, other candidates, just don't exist. Because then, because we don't fit their narrative, we don't fit the paradigm.
Exactly. You don't fit the narrative. You don't fit the paradigm, and they just do not acknowledge you, and they do everything they can to shut people down, because they want the paradigm that people currently have right now to be as narrow as it can possibly be, so they can continue to promote this garbage called American exceptionalism, which to me is as frightening, as problematic, as dangerous as what people euphemistically call white supremacy. I don't use those words because that's an oxymoron. Yeah. I call it for what it is. And I continue to get suspended from Facebook for calling it out for what it is. But I call that mentality out for what it is: white, racist, barbaric savagery, because that is what it was built upon, and that is how it acts, and that is what it delivers. But I continue to get suspended for that. So, but we have to challenge these paradigms. We can no longer continue to allow what I just call such shallow
analysis.
Yes.
Yeah.
Shallow analysis, if you want to call it analysis, but we cannot continue to just allow this kind of shallow analysis to be so pervasive. We have to challenge the people. We really do. We have to challenge them, because people are being killed. You know, we continue to bomb other countries. We see what's going on domestically. We know about, we hear about police brutality. I have certainly experienced that myself. I know of two people that I grew up with who were gunned down by the police unjustifiably. So one was in New Jersey, one was in Massachusetts. You know, these things and these times have got to be challenged. They must. And I do appreciate the opportunity, any chance I get to use my voice to do so.
Well, we really welcome you and appreciate your voice also. We think it's very important. Do we have any questions on Facebook or YouTube, Emma, for Lisa?
I found one question so far over on YouTube. Dust James says, Lisa, can you talk about the connections between oppression of African Americans in the United States and the imperialist oppression of the global South?
Oh, that's a very good question. Yes. The way that I see it is that what they have done to African people in this country, when I say African people, I don't even acknowledge the American, I don't hyphenate myself any longer. I am African, and I definitely stand united with the African people of the world. But what they seek to do is their domestic policy that was employed toward African people in this country, they seek to just employ it globally, you know, the world over. And you know, we can see a various formula almost, if you want to say that. They will demonize them so badly. They just demonize them. They say that, oh, their countries are governed by dictators. Dictator is a word that basically shuts down the discussion. It shuts down the analysis. When I was looking at the most recent Democratic debate, which is one of the only ones that I've really looked at, I was really appalled to see how they were discussing the issue of the international issue and the issue of war. And they are continuously calling all these other countries, any country in which the United States cannot just go in and force their policies of capitalism and, the World Bank and the IMF, any country that presents a challenge to that will be called a terrorist or a dictator. And I sat there while they were debating this issue, and all of the candidates on that stage were framing these conversations in terms of, well, those other countries, they are dictators. And even Sanders was saying that. And I'm like, why are you talking? Why are you using the narrative of the imperialists? I don't want conversations about, oh, well, this person is a dictator, therefore we have to do that, and we should maybe treat some dictators with a little more kindness. That conversation serves nothing. That conversation serves nothing at all. And we have to understand the situations that are going on. We have to understand that internationally, as oppressive as this country is domestically, their international policy, they have far more range to go and to operate as they want to. This is how this country was set up. It was set up so there would be some semblance of checks and balances domestically, which we know there really is not. But internationally, there's hardly any. And all we continue to do is just accept these shallow, useless narratives from this government that, oh, these people are dictators. You hear them talking about Cuba. You hear them talk about Cuba because Sanders, and I'm not necessarily a Sanders supporter, but this is just what comes to my mind the most, because Sanders does represent, it's not even so much who Sanders is as much as it is what he represents and the people that he's appealing to. And the last thing that this country wants, Democrat or Republican, is for people's mind to shift at all to the left. The least little bit. They don't want that at all. They don't want you questioning. They don't want any of that. And so we see where Sanders made some comment about Cuba, which was not as aggressively ruthless about Cuba as what they normally say about him. And they were challenging him like anything. And the irony of this is that while they're calling him a dictator, while they're talking about Castro and they're saying that their country and their government is so repressive, they have the audacity to be bringing up Mandela. In fact, Biden even said that, oh, he went to South Africa at some point and he helped Mandela, or he was arrested. And yet, right. Cuba is the country that really helped South Africa. Cuba really did. Fidel Castro sent troops on the ground to them. Who was the country that was completely against that was supportive of the apartheid government, but was completely against the people who were resisting? The United States of America. It was the United States, the CIA, that had something to do with them capturing. I thought we lost my little video. It had something to do with them capturing not Fidel Castro, Nelson Mandela when he was imprisoned. And then once Mandela was even out of prison, he was still on the terrorist list, the U.S. terrorist list. Oh boy, I botched that word up. But he was still on that. And for the longest time, the United States openly said that the South African government is there, that the South African government is a friend to the United States. They have openly said that. And yet today we hear them going after Castro, lambasting him, while they don't say anything at all about the heinous role that they played in supporting the South African government. And now it's supposed to be, oh, well, we just don't talk about that because it's not convenient to talk about it. Or they just continue to just flip the narrative. They, flip the switch. And they have people talking about Fidel Castro in terms of, oh, he's some brutal dictator. And I've even heard Black people, some of them, not as many as I used to hear when I was growing up, because that is certainly being challenged.
Great. Any other questions?
We do. We have
Emma?
One more. Our previous guest, Madelyn Hoffman, is still watching, and she asks, Lisa, how do we get the reparations needed for all the years of oppression of Africans in this country?
Oh, that's an easy question. I can answer. Easy answer. I'm glad you asked that question, and thank you so very much. It is a question that is going to certainly take a lot more discussion among African people, but it must be acknowledged and recognized by this country. This country must acknowledge that a debt is owed, that reparations is owed, and it's imperative that they acknowledge it, that they be forced to acknowledge it, that we really fight this issue as strongly as we possibly can as African people, because it is not just about a payment, although be clear, I want every bit that is owed. I'll take a check, I'll take PayPal, I'll take whatever that is owed. There is definitely a debt that is owed, and we want it. We want every bit of it. But at some point, I would think the people of this country, and I can only speak for myself as a Black person, but I would think that white people in this country who have a conscience, who want things to change, would really see the importance of acknowledging and looking at, thoroughly examining what happened, because this country, everything that the United States has, this whole system of capitalism, not just from the United States, but European capitalism, if you look at England, all of it was based on the enslavement of African people. And then, of course, we know that there was a genocide going in and murdering and killing other people. And I don't even mean to make that sound like a secondary issue. But you have to examine what this country was based upon, the mindset, the way of thinking that built this up, and ask yourself, are you going to want to continue this way? Literally, colonialism is destroying the planet. Literally. It's destroying it, not just in terms of all the people that are being murdered, not just in terms of all of its wars. And of course, wars are bad. And we know that if you drop bombs on people, that, the bombs and the radiation that the bombs release does not help the environment. But even the very way of looking at this world and the relationship that has been set up that people have to this world is a very destructive relationship. I am currently learning more about what is going on with farming and how this system of farming, this industrialized system of farming, is really a way that is counterproductive to the natural ways of the earth. That killing the soil destroys the topsoil. Mm-hmm. It destroys it a lot.
Right. Uh-oh. Is Lisa still with us?
Uh-oh. There's all of a sudden two of me.
No.
Oh, here
there she is. We lost her for a sec.
Yes. But it destroys it. And that I had been reading that there are, people like some of the ancient African techniques of working with the soil.
Oh, geez.
Uh-oh. She must have a connection problem. Oh, she's back.
Yep. Yeah.
There.
Call keeps coming in. I don't know how to put these calls on.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Oh, is that what's happening? You keep getting calls and you're on your phone.
Yes,
okay. Do we have anything else for Lisa? There she is. She's popular.
There are no more questions, but a lot of people just saying what you're saying is great. They support reparations. They support you and what you're saying. So a lot of people are happy that you're here and that you joined us today.
Thank you so very much. Mm-hmm. Again, that is so very appreciated. And I want to thank you so much for having me on the show. As I have made a point of saying, I do not just believe in uniting about women in general, because when we talk about colonialism, there is the male aspect of it and the female aspect of it. And we know in terms of this system of colonialism that men and women who were white, that's just the truth, they both participated in this. Okay. And sometimes when we just look at this movement, like women in general, it really absolves and it masks the history of the role that women played in this. And so I've always said to myself, I'm never going to just sit with women in general. I'm going to sit with people who choose to make a deliberate choice to be aware of certain things. I want to know politics. I want to know them. So that's why I will participate in programs like this, but just the feminist movement and women in general, no, I won't do that because I don't know who they are. And people have to acknowledge, the reality that this country was built on if we are ever going to change it.
We completely agree, and that's why we support you and want to hear your voice as often as possible. You came down to Washington in October and shared your wisdom with us. And I just want to just a brief comment because we are running really behind. Margaret Kimberly, I'm sure you know Margaret. She wrote a book recently called Prejudicial, and it's about the 45 presidents and their relationship with Black America. And one thing I learned from her is how vicious Martha Washington was. What a vicious slave owner she was, you know. And so that's like history we never learn in school.
Exactly. And I just want to say one other thing. I want to challenge people in this country to have a different perspective on this. When we look at the president and the first lady, they are a team. They come as a team. So I heard many people say sometimes, well, you can't judge her according to what her husband did. I'm like, oh, but yes, you can.
Yeah, you can.
He's a politician. She's married to him. She knows what he's doing, and she supports it. Yes, you can. They are a team.
And they're very involved in every aspect of the campaigns. And I mean, look at Jill Biden. Jill Biden just told us that we have to move on from Anita Hill. Well, how did what Joe Biden did to Anita Hill, which brought us Clarence Thomas, by the way, how did Joe Biden, what he did to Anita Hill back in the hearings, how did that hurt her? It didn't hurt her. So she's able to say, let's move on.
Exactly. He's not the one to determine that, period.
Right. Okay, dear. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be more in touch. And feel free to stay on and watch the rest of our presenters too.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so very much.
On the live stream wherever we have it. Okay.
Great.
Thank you, dear.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
So I think you're the next one, Emma, on our schedule. Yeah.
Yes.
So,
hold on. I'm just doing the other stuff. Okay. Yes.
So Emma's going to talk, and I'm sorry that we're behind. So if there's any people, do I look really smart with my reading glasses on?
Yes. Of course you do.
I probably wouldn't need them if I didn't have a migraine yesterday. So if there's anybody who's a presenter that's watching while you're presenting, I'll try to get a hold of them and tell them that we're running behind and to hang on. But Emma, parentheses, Fiala Sran, is going to be speaking on, am I saying your last name right?
Yes.
I don't know any other way to say it. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, women and the community under U.S. imperialism. And Emma is an activist, documentary photographer, mom of two, and independent journalist. She is on the board of Women Against Military Madness and there in Minneapolis. Emma is an editorial assistant, but you're not that anymore, are you?
No.
At Mid-Press? Yeah. You might want to update your bio on the website.
Noted. Thank you.
She's a journalist and editor at The Mind Unleashed. Is that still correct?
Yes.
Her articles have been featured on Mint Press, Anti-Media, Zero Hedge, The Mind Unleashed, and Media Roots. She previously interned with Empire Files with Abby Martin, visited Standing Rock, and organized a grassroots rescue effort in Texas after Hurricane Harvey. Emma lives in Minnesota, where she frequently participates in and photographs local protests and actions. Emma is a webmaster for March on the Pentagon and social media guru for us, as well as on the executive board. So welcome, Emma, and I'll mute myself and then go contact the rest of our presenters.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, have fun. All right, let me get Cindy out of here. So, like Cindy said, we are running behind a little bit, so I'm going to try to be quick. Also, I'm running the tech end of this, so it's a little interesting to participate and be monitoring everything at the same time and checking all the comments and stuff. So just like for anybody else, if you have a question while I'm talking, just put it into the comments wherever you're watching this live stream, and then I guess I will ask myself those questions if there are any when I'm done talking. So my topic is, like Cindy said, women and the community under U.S. imperialism. And a lot of the speakers that have already talked have kind of touched on this, which is a good point and something that you're probably all very aware of, how all of these things are very connected. It's hard to have this many people talking about something that has to do with women and imperialism and not cross all the different topics. So it's been happening, but that makes sense. So I wanted to start out by highlighting the U.S. war budget, which I'm pretty sure everybody knows is massive. It's more than $700 billion. We are ranked by far the top in the world in terms of military spending. But even in addition to that stuff, you've probably heard about the $21 trillion that the Pentagon cannot account for. Our budget is more than $700 billion. The Pentagon is missing $21 trillion. Those are two very different numbers. It's very hard for anyone, even people who think about numbers like this all the time, to understand really what billions and trillions are, especially trillions. The fact that that much money is completely missing and not accounted for, no one knows what it was used for, no one knows if it just got up and walked away or whatever might have happened to it, is absolutely absurd, especially during a time right now where we have people campaigning to become president of the United States. And that question that Cindy has mentioned keeps coming up: how are we going to pay for it, especially when we're talking about healthcare? Look at how much money our country spends on war. Look at how much money the Pentagon is missing. The fact that we're asking how much money we can spend on something like healthcare that is absolutely necessary for people to be healthy and survive is shocking and really sickening. Just for example, I can't say how much money it would cost for everybody to have perfect healthcare with the current system that we have right now and not have medical issues. But if we wanted to solve something like homelessness, it's estimated that it would only take $20 billion to end homelessness. Again, our war budget is more than $700 billion. Only $20 billion would end homelessness in our country. So it's obvious that whether you're a man or a woman in our country, there is a big discrepancy in terms of where the money is going. It's funneled towards war, it's focused on imperialism, and not any of these programs or social services here at home. So that obviously adversely affects everybody here. Everything from education to healthcare to infrastructure would all potentially be better inside of our country if we were not sending all of our money into these programs that are just about imperialism and war. And specifically, right now, there's something filling the headlines that makes this even more important to focus on, is we're potentially battling a worldwide pandemic that is completely unprecedented and not something that anyone has really experienced before. Some other countries who have battled this before it got to the United States have done it a lot better than we are going to be able to do here. For example, South Korea has free drive-up testing for COVID-19. There's a lot of reasons why driving up for a test like that is good, but the fact that they're free, if you feel like you need one, you can drive up, you don't have to get out of your car and potentially infect anybody else, but they're free. In the US, I think there had been plans to charge more than $3,000 per test for this. There was an example in the news I think last week, of a man that was charged that much. He did have insurance, not great insurance, and was still left with a $1,400 bill afterwards. Since then, there was a lot of pushback and outrage, obviously, about that. Medicare and Medicaid have said that they will cover the costs of testing, but that should be a no-brainer. That shouldn't be something that is an afterthought or that happens because of outrage. For the greater good of not only all of the people here, but the greater good of the entire world, we should be providing whatever is necessary to keep people safe from this thing, but that's not how the systems in our country operate, which is just so obvious when you look at how much money is spent on war and imperialism, and you look at how much money is spent on people. So if we continue putting all of those things in front of battling a potentially unprecedented pandemic, we're not going to come out ahead. And then there's the fact that we have so many countries are sanctioned right now because of us, and that seriously harms their ability to respond to just the normal problems that come up in any country, but also natural disasters or something like this. It's scary to think about how we might not be able to battle it here because of the focus of our country, and then how other people might not be able to battle it because of what we've done to them. But outside of that, because we don't face worldwide pandemics daily, families in the United States are suffering under imperialism constantly, and unfortunately a lot of people don't realize that. They think that this is just the way it is. I don't know if they don't understand what the true war budget is, and how much of their tax dollars and just how much of our country's resources are put into things that harm other people overseas for reasons that we never directly benefit from. Not that I would want to directly benefit from doing things like that anyway, but our social services and our education and everything is just severely lacking because of that. Because imperialism is part of our country, obviously the military is massive here, and that leads to increased violence against women, not only on bases overseas. There's higher rates of rape close to bases overseas, but that also happens here within our country as well. And it's not hard to find the facts about the military and violence against women. I brought up some facts here that it's glaringly obvious that there is more spousal abuse involving members of the military, which is predominantly perpetrated by men and active duty personnel. The Army has consistently shown the highest rates of domestic violence, but across the board, all of the different branches of the military have higher rates of domestic violence than not. The victims of domestic violence in the military is predominantly females, in addition, if they're enrolled in the military, in addition to civilian spouses of active duty personnel. And a lot of these victims also have children. And a lot of them are in newer marriages also. We also see the effects of imperialism within our country in the militarized police. Police are constantly grabbing up new military equipment that has been used or sometimes hasn't been used, and they're things that are obviously unnecessary for local police departments to have. We don't need tanks. Police don't need to be in fatigues, like camouflage. Generally, I don't think that they need to camouflage themselves in that way on city streets, but our militarization of police is dramatically increasing, and that's directly related to war and imperialism being part of what our country is. There's lots of different ways to try to combat these different things on a local level. We should try to combat them on a greater level, and like Madelyn and Diane brought up, if you do have a preferred candidate in the presidential race or in any other race, you really need to hold those people accountable and put statistics and put facts in front of them and try to get them to respond to some of these things. But on the local level also, You can be a part of local organizations. Cindy mentioned the one that I'm a part of here locally in Minnesota called Women Against Military Madness. Obviously, that is related to women. The board is all women. There are definitely men that are members of the organization, similar to how March on the Pentagon works. But locally, you can be part of an organization like that who is protesting and having actions, but also trying to get real things done. You can go to your city council, whether you have an organization or not, and you can bring some of these issues to them. While it might not feel like it's making a huge impact or doing something directly, your city council can actually release statements if the city council votes to do so about things that you've brought forward to them. For example, in January, the Minneapolis City Council approved a resolution that opposed war with Iran and called for immediate de-escalation. Obviously, Minneapolis is just one town and one state in the country, but the fact that people brought that issue to the city council considered it, so some people probably learned new information and new facts, and then they put out this statement that potentially all of the people in Minneapolis could read. You can also get your cities to divest from things by doing that also, by going to city council or taking it to your state government also. We have things like that happening in Minnesota, trying to get the state to divest from Elbit Systems. It's an Israeli company that is engaged in a lot of very unpleasant things with the Israel-Palestine issue, but also they are providing technology for the wall at the U.S. southern border. So there are a lot of states that are also invested in things like that, and you can work with people locally to try to change that, or just inform people that that's even something that's happening, because a lot of people have no idea that things like that are happening. Speaking of the militarization of police, you can also try to get things like that tackled locally by going to your city council or going to your state government. And one thing that we have done a few times with March on the Pentagon, which is a little bit of a different way to resist imperialism, is something that we decided to call civil assistance rather than civil resistance. After the first time we did it was after March on the Pentagon, when we marched to the Pentagon 2 years ago. The following day, a bunch of people showed up with a bunch of food to feed some of the homeless population in a park in Washington, D.C. A great way to resist the effects of imperialism is to do little things like that, where you are pushing back on the damage that has been done and pushing back on the structure that has been made that most people kind of try to work within. Things like feeding the homeless have unfortunately made some governments angry. There are laws in some places where you can't do things like that, but pushing back against that is actually a good thing. So there's a lot of different ways that locally you can fight back against all of the effects of imperialism, even if you don't have hope or don't think that the person who's elected to president is actually going to stop this and tackle these things. We all each individually have power. So I would highly recommend that people, if you're not already linked up with local organizations that are doing things like this, to try to find some. And if there isn't anything near you, try to start it. Even if it's just you and a couple of people and you show up to your city council meetings or something like that, or even you just email city council members and give them information. There's a lot of different ways to inform people and to fight back against some of this stuff. So I am going to end with that and see if I can find any questions. I'm going to see if Cindy wants to come back on. Do you want to give me a thumbs up when you're ready, Cindy?
Can you see me?
Oh yeah, cool. I'm gonna.
So, let me see.
I will look for some questions if there's anything you wanted to add. I tried to be fast to
Right.
to stay on schedule.
There's this good resource called the National Priorities Project, and they're, can you hear me, Emma?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay. They're website is nationalpriorities.org, and there's a page about, it's called trade-offs, and it's like, it says for military in 2018, which must be the most recent year they have available, taxpayers in the for the military, taxpayers paid $712 billion. So, and they have a little bit of trade-offs, which really I think could massively support our communities. 8.82 million of that, that money could hire almost 9 million elementary school teachers, almost 10 million clean energy jobs, almost 13 million infrastructure jobs, 7 million jobs with support created in high poverty communities. It could be 80 million Head Start slots for children for 1 year. 70 million veterans receiving VA medical care, 20 million scholarships for university students for all 4 years. So there's just like, if we weren't spending all of this money on the military, obviously the U.S. wouldn't be such a shithole country.
Definitely. I think that is something to focus on. I see some people in the comments kind of arguing a little bit about if socialism, if that's the answer for these things. But instead of arguing like the name of the system that we should have, just pointing out that we spend so much money on war and don't spend it on people. If we cut out that entire war budget, or even cut it in half, we could pay for all of these other things. So it's not that you would necessarily have to pay more for any of them. But instead of kind of getting lost in that argument of like what system is better, the system we have right now is the wrong one. It's very bad, and it's
absolutely.
So much money is spent on horrible things.
Well, like we pointed out earlier, more than the next 12 countries combined, and so that Russia is not the USSR anymore. It's not socialist, but, it spends like a fraction of what we spend. China spends a fraction of what we spend, and then the countries I would consider veering more towards socialism, like Cuba and Venezuela, they spend very little because you know why? They really respect the sovereignty of other countries. They believe that a military is for defense, not offense, not to have 1,000 military bases around the world. I'm going to have to put something out by my door for a second. So if you have any other questions, you can address while I'm doing that.
Okay. Let me get Cindy off the screen. It doesn't look like we had more questions. There was a little bit of confusion about the budget and the missing money. If you just search, if you want to know more about the $21 trillion that are unaccounted for, if you just do a Google search or alternative search if you don't use Google, it's, for the past couple of years, a lot more and more people have been talking about it, but I would check out comedian Lee Camp. He's talked about that quite a bit, and if you search for him and $21 trillion in Pentagon, you'll find some of the work that he's done on that, and he does it a little humorously, so maybe you'll cry less when you learn about it. I think we might be able to move on to our next guest. Yeah, while Cindy comes back, I will... Oh, here she is.
I'm back.
Hi.
So
okay, I think you were muted for a second. I'm gonna call Mnar.
Okay.
Are we skipping our next video and going into the next?
We said we were going to do that last, so we can catch up with the people who are live.
Okay, I will leave you on the screen if you want to start introducing her, and then I will give her a call.
Right on. Okay. So while Emma was talking, one of my grandsons called me, and he wanted to come and pick something up, so I had to put it out by my front door. And so everybody here is seeing that I'm in my pajama bottoms. So If I'm getting up and you're seeing me in blue thing with stars, those are my jammy bottoms. So our next guest is a good friend of March on the Pentagon, Mnar Muhawesh. She's going to be speaking about women in Palestine under U.S. imperialism and Israeli colonialism. Mnar is founder, CEO, and editor-in-chief of Mint Press News, and is also a regular speaker. Hi, hi, dear. I'm introducing you right now. She's also a regular speaker on responsible journalism, sexism, and neoconservatism within the media. Mnar spent time living in Palestine as a child. She began her career as an independent multimedia journalist covering Midwest and national politics while focusing on civil liberties and social justice issues. In 2009, Mnar became the first American woman to wear the hijab to anchor report the news in American media. And she's, like I said, a really good friend of March on Pentagon and one of my favorite people in the whole world. So we're going to turn it over to you, beauty.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm coincidentally at a women's conference right now in Minneapolis, and I wish you guys could be here with me. And I'm so jealous of both of your T-shirts. I feel like I'm dressed super like professional in pink.
But you have one. You have one of these, though, right?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I rock it in the Minneapolis suburbs all the time. And I already get stares for my hijab, but why not?
Yeah. No. What the heck?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I've been invited to speak with you guys and share some experiences that I had living in Palestine as a woman and living under Israeli occupation and apartheid, and also to explain, the Palestinian woman's struggle living under Israeli occupation and her role in the resistance against occupation and apartheid. Well, when I was in the 5th grade, I was just about 9 years old. My parents decided to move our family out of Minneapolis to go overseas to live in Palestine so that we can learn more about our culture and heritage as Palestinians, as our land was being ethnically cleansed by Israel. And upon arrival there, it was a very beautiful country from the first scenes that I had witnessed. But it was very easy not to notice, even as a young child, that I had just moved under occupation and a police state. Everywhere we turned, there were Israeli soldiers, marching in the streets, having their guns pointed at civilians. And you can sense the sense of fear within the community. And while I was young, I was able, to go enter school. And I went to an American school, because I didn't speak enough Arabic to go to an Arab-speaking school. But when I went to school, most of the kids were Palestinian American like myself, but a lot of them lived across borders in the West Bank. And so for them to come to school, they would have to cross checkpoints. And as the second Intifada had increased, the numbers in my classroom started to decline because the checkpoints started to increase, and Israeli soldiers would deny a lot of these children from crossing the checkpoints to get to school. And sometimes we would even wonder, because we would watch the news and we would see, in the 5th grade, in the 6th grade, we would see and hear the news talking about how Israeli bombs and airstrikes would be hitting cities and areas near Ramallah. And so when those seats were empty, we didn't know if those kids would be coming to school that day. And, this was very devastating for me as a child because I had just come from, this what we consider in America a very simple and westernized society and culture. And I apologize if you guys are having a hard time hearing me. There's people passing by right now, but I swear it's been literally quiet for the past hour while I was sitting here watching the live stream.
We can hear you. It's okay.
Okay, good. Good. And so we would have to cross through checkpoints to visit families to get from one city to another, one neighborhood sometimes to another, as Israel was building its apartheid wall to separate Palestinian families. And as we would pass through these checkpoints, a lot of times when we were, riding in taxis or in buses, whatever transportation we had, the drivers would oftentimes tell us, they would yell, duck, duck, while we would cross through checkpoints, because Israeli soldiers would be shooting at civilians crossing through. Many times I had witnessed little children trying to cross through checkpoints, and there'd be literally 6-7-year-old kids wearing their backpacks, like tiny little people, that were so vulnerable, trying to cross through checkpoints to get to school, and Israeli soldiers would be, aiming their guns at them, firing rubber bullets at them, and just, really terrorizing and intimidating these children. And, these were the kinds of things that I would see on a regular basis after an intifada. And another scene that I would witness are women holding their husbands' hands, or women holding, the 5 children that they had, trying to cross through to take their kids to school, to take their kids to the doctor's office. And Israeli soldiers would make it so difficult for them to pass. Did they have the right permit, even though that was their land and they lived there? Did they have the right, paperwork to pass through? Did they have the right kind of passport or residency? All of those things. And so as a young child, this was so devastating for me, especially because I had come from an American culture and society, and I had seen this. It was like a huge culture shock to go from living in a very peaceful suburban area in Minneapolis to now living in what can only be described as a war zone, living under Israeli occupation and a police state. And so my parents obviously thought, okay, this is becoming really hard for us. We ourselves, as our family, we were pretty Americanized, and so this was a pretty difficult life, even though for the millions of Palestinians this was completely normal in their everyday. And so my parents moved us back to the United States in 2001 in the spring, and I had entered junior high here. I was about 12 and a half, 13 years old, entering junior high, and it was another culture shock, because now I had come back to America, and it was a different kind of culture shock. Now everything was so calm, still, and peaceful. And I had gone to school, and none of the kids you could even, point to where Palestine was on the map. So I felt like I was just living in my own head, in my own world, trying to make sense of everything that I had left behind. A couple of weeks before I had left Palestine, I was sitting on my rooftop watching Israeli planes airstrike homes in Ramallah. I mean, we could see these, images right there. I mean, it was like right there in our face. It was the reality. And so now that I had left Palestine and I was in a more calmer environment, it was like my mind was racing, because everything that I had seen, everything that I had witnessed, was like all of a sudden hitting me, and my brain was just racing all the time. And when kids would ask me, like, where were you from? Where did you come from? I would say Palestine, and just tears. I could barely even say the word Palestine, and tears would just come running down my face, because I was so overwhelmed with emotion and trauma just from everything that I had seen. And every time I tell the story, I cry because it brings me back to that time. But anyways, I had been suffering what many service members suffer from when they return from war, which is, anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder because of the war that I had left behind, the human rights abuses that I had witnessed. As a child, I was like now 12, 13 years old, trying to make sense of, the world around me. And I sat in my classroom and I felt so alone, because while kids were thinking about, sex, drugs, music, and what latest brand they could wear, I couldn't get those kids trying to get to school out of my mind. And I had a sense of guilt that this was not supposed to be a crying session. Everybody's so sorry. I had a sense of guilt, like, I had to do something about it. I had to educate people about what was happening in Palestine and show what the true cost of war is. And so, at a very young age, I was like 13 years old in like the 8th grade, and I was like, I'm going to become a journalist. I used that trauma that I had experienced, that deep, deep sadness that I was feeling from just, what I had witnessed, as my strength. It became my strength soon enough, and I wanted to use it to become a journalist, to speak up for those who didn't have a voice, especially Palestinians, and especially Palestinian women, because when we, even at that young age, I was aware enough that when I turned to the media to learn more about what was going on overseas from the corporate media, whether it was CNN, the Washington Post, MSNBC, the New York Times, whatever mainstream media outlet that we have here in the United States, the conflict in Palestine is, the narrative is flipped. Palestinians are shown as the abusers. They're the ones shown as terrorists. The women are shown as oppressed, when in reality, the women in Palestine are the ones leading the resistance against Israeli occupation and apartheid. And as a Palestinian woman myself, and having a mother who's Palestinian and having family members who are Palestinian and overseas who are all, women, it just made sense, for me to pursue that route in journalism, to go to speak up for those who didn't have a voice, who were living under Israeli occupation. And so I continued my journey through and became a journalist. And some of the things that we cover at Mnar, the Palestinian woman leading resistance against Israeli occupation. We cover very in-depth how the United States is arming one of the most atrocious apartheid regimes in our modern history. I mean, we thought South African apartheid was bad. Well, Israeli apartheid is very bad, if not worse than what the South Africans had lived through. It's very, very similar, and and they've taken it on to another level now, because now they have such sophisticated weapons that are being provided to them by the largest empire in in world history, which is the United States. And so, what's happening now in Palestine is we have movements within prisons where women are being kidnapped in the middle of the night, Palestinian women who are organizing protests and demonstrations, who are standing up courageously to Israeli soldiers who are coming to their towns to bulldoze homes, to expand their apartheid walls, to set curfews on villages. The women of these communities are the ones who are resisting and organizing first, even before the men in their communities. I was reading an article on Al Jazeera a couple of days ago about a town, I forgot what town it was, I think it was somewhere near Ramallah, that was under siege. And they had interviewed a Palestinian woman, and they asked her, when you came out to organize a protest, like, what did you do? How did you know to do that? And she said, well, I saw the Israeli soldiers coming, and immediately I just picked up my phone and I called my sister. She didn't mention one man's name. She said, I called my sister, I called my mother, I called my daughter, and then they called it's like women. These are the women who are bringing their families together to organize these movements to protest. And so one of the movements that we're following right now at Mint Press is the Palestinian hunger strike movement, where a young woman, who's about the age of, I believe, 17 or 18, her name is Hiba al-Labadi. She's literally 17, 18 years old, and she's leading a hunger strike for over 400 Palestinian prisoners who are protesting their inhumane and illegal detention in Israeli prisons. And then we're also following the movement that's been taking place for the last year and a half, the Great March of Return in Gaza, where Palestinians literally organized and set up by women, organized a march that takes place every single Friday after Friday prayers to gather Gazans, Palestinians who live in Gaza, which is an open air prison. Gazans have been living under an illegal 11-year siege, where no food, no medical supplies, no journalists, no medical aid people, no human rights organizations, no one and nothing is allowed. Not even school supplies like crayons are allowed to enter the Gaza Strip. And there in Gaza, a population of over 3 million, of about 3 million people are living in just extreme poverty. Hundreds of thousands of children are malnourished. It's a very similar situation to what Saudi Arabia is doing in Yemen. It's a very cruel and inhumane situation. And so Palestinians, hundreds of Palestinians are, gather together, organized by women, gather and march towards the Israeli border to demand that the siege be lifted so that they can, get food in, they can get humanitarian aid in, and journalists in, and people to document what's happening there. And they are caught, they are met with sniper fire in these areas. And one of the first people that was sniped and killed by Israeli soldiers was a Palestinian female nurse by the name of Razan Najjar, who is just a heroine to Palestinian women in the area, because she risked her life every single day. She organized all these female nurses to be on the front lines of this march, where to help and support and to treat any wounded Palestinians. I mean, these are unarmed, completely unarmed Palestinian people standing up to, again, you know, a military Goliath with very sophisticated weapons, and they're being shot at left and right and sniped by Israeli soldiers, and these women are there being shot at as well. Israel is painting them as terrorists, as these, you know, the marches are being organized by, you know, Hamas and, you know, all of these things. But in reality, these are grassroots movements of people that are organizing to fight the siege, to lift the siege, and to bring attention to the reality of these inhumane situations that they're living through. And I recently interviewed Abby Martin on my podcast, Mintcast, that I just launched a couple of weeks ago. And she actually, you know, it was pretty amazing because she said, she's like, you know, Palestinian women are silenced within our media, especially, you know, and not just Palestinian women, but Arab women and Muslim women in general are completely sidelined within the mainstream corporate media. We are painted, we're only given a voice if our voice lends a hand to any mainstream and war narrative. That's the only time our voices are allowed to be heard. But the Palestinian woman, the Arab woman, the Muslim woman, these women are always silenced. And it is because the mainstream and the establishment is so afraid of what they have to say. They're so afraid of their strength. And Abby really described how when she went into the West Bank and she had videographers like document what was happening in Gaza. She said, she said, you know, I was actually shocked. She's like, the majority of, first of all, the videographers themselves were women. You know, they were the women who were documenting. It's very talented, you know, artistic women documenting what was happening in Gaza. And then the women were the ones leading the marches. They were the ones who were organizing everything. And it's so amazing because when you watch the mainstream corporate media coverage of anything Palestine, what you always see is the image of and also the Muslim and Arab man is also misconstrued because it's always a dark, covered, you know, Arab man who's abusive, who's angry, who's wielding a gun. And that's the image that we're constantly shown when it comes to Palestine. When we have these very strong-minded and intelligent women leading these movements. And so that was a really, even for myself, it was just a reminder from Abby that, you know, through her documentary, which everybody should be checking out, called Gaza Fights for Freedom, just how powerful these movements are and how inspiring they are for freedom and justice. And then we have people like, you know, the young teenager, her name is Ahad, I always have a hard time saying Ahad Tamimi from Nabi Saleh, who herself, now she's become really famous, but before her, it was her mother and her aunt who were leading every single protest in Nabi Saleh. And this town has been bombarded by Israeli soldiers left and right. They just, you know, they open fire at the men, they kidnap the young boys, they hold them in detention. I mean, it's all like physical and psychological torture. They do whatever they can to subdue the population. But what has happened is that this kind of aggression that Israel has been, you know, putting on to Palestinians has actually empowered the people. It's given them, just like it did with me, you know, witnessing these crimes, it only empowered me and gave me strength to do the right, you know, giving these people a voice. All of this aggression that Israel is doing towards Palestinians is only empowering the society there in fighting harder and becoming stronger and uniting more against the occupation. And what the fight against Israeli occupation represents is just a microcosm of what people around the world are doing to resist not just Israeli occupation and apartheid and, you know, militarism, but U.S. militarism. You know, Israel is like a mini version of U.S. empire. It's a proxy state of U.S. empire. And so that's what we have to remember is what's happening in Palestine and even what's happening in Yemen. I bring up Yemen a lot because there's so many similarities, but the women in Yemen are also leading the resistance there. They're the ones leading and organizing the marches. to resist Saudi Arabia's blockade and bombardment of their country. And so whenever if we were to truly, even as Americans, not only support, support an alternative perspective about these conflicts, we also have to challenge the notions of what Muslim women are and Arab women are, and even what the Arab man is, because it's not just Muslim women who are misconstrued, it's also the Arab man in the way that they are in that society.
Oh, Mnar, thank you so much for your presentation. It was very touching, and don't apologize for getting emotional. How can you not
every
get
time.
Emotional? I know. How can you not get emotional? It's just
it's my trauma. It's my trauma. Yes, it's the trauma that I grew up with. And every day through my work, that's my strength to get through everything that I do. So.
And
thank you for allowing me to speak of it.
Yeah, too bad more people here don't internalize the trauma that their country is inflicting on other people. Yes. So, Emma, we probably have time for a couple questions. We got Lucy. Lucy's on deck waiting for her presentation. So, thank you so much, Mnar.
Of course. Am I good to go?
No, Emma's gonna check and see if she has a question for you.
Okay.
We've got, again, we have more comments than we have questions, but that's great. A lot of people...
I think it's...
What was that?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. A lot of people...
It was cutting off a bit, but I can hear you now.
Okay. A lot of people are happy to hear what you had to say. They definitely love Abby's movie, and I think more people need to watch that. Diane Moxley says, thank you for sharing. Your emotions only enhance this struggle. She asks, what can we do in the U.S. to support the Palestinian struggle? What are the best organizations to support, as well as movements?
That was going to be my question, so that's good. And also I want to know how much, what can March on the Pentagon do to be in solidarity with these struggles in a more concrete way, not just saying we support the struggles, but what can we do to support them?
Well, I think the first and foremost thing is to not fall into the two-party system. I know the two-party system does not work in favor of any human rights abroad. Both parties, whether Republican or Democrat, are going to be supporting U.S. empire in some form or another. No matter how soft people take, whatever, even let's, consider the current presidential campaigns of like Bernie Sanders and other Democratic hopefuls. Every single one of them supports Israeli occupation and apartheid. They may not say it openly like that, but if you look and read their policies, they are 100% behind Israel's right to exist, Israel's right to defend itself. And again, that terminology in itself is like, we're talking about an occupying force that is engaging in a very racist apartheid, policies. And so I think the first thing we need to do is we need to, resist the two-party system and support candidates that are independent, candidates from the Green Party or Libertarian Party, whoever it may be, that are going to support human rights across the board, no matter who it is, whether it's at home or abroad, and that are going to promote the idea of bringing down the military and ending, even U.S. militarism abroad. That's the first thing. The second thing is I think we need to support organizations like Women Against Military Madness, organizations like March on the Pentagon. I mean, I am every single day so impressed with the work that Cindy does and Emma does. I mean, these two women are my inspiration. I don't know how you guys do it, but you are organizing and bringing attention to the struggles that our mainstream could never do. They don't even care. And if you look at like March on the Women's March, for example, somebody who's leading that march, they do have a Palestinian, Linda Sarsour, which is amazing. And there are actually some Palestinian women who are in that organization, but they're also being silenced. They're also being sidelined. And the organization is also being heavily funded and influenced by the Democratic Party. And so we have to, resist organizations that are corporate funded and that are, aligned with the Democratic Party. And I think those are the biggest things. And if on a mass scale that happens, I hope one day it will. If on a mass scale that happens, then we truly have a movement that could bring attention to the Palestinian plight.
Oh, thank you so much. Your voice is so important, and we know you're super duper busy. So thank you for joining us today. You added a really good depth to our program here.
Thank you guys for having me. It was an honor, Cindy.
Happy International Working Women's Day.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you, Mnar.
Bye.
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 Okay, so the ad is really great. So our next guest, and she's waiting,
Okay, I will
is
go call
Lucy.
her.
Okay, Lucy Pagoada-Quesada. She is going to be speaking on women in Latin America under U.S. imperialism and sanctions. And I'm going to read her bio. Lucy is the mother of a teenage son, a New York City Department of Education high school teacher, human rights defender, political and social activist. She is also the official coordinator of the Libre Party, USA Canada, which is the political arm of the Honduran resistance, coordinated in Honduras by President Manuel Zelaya, overthrown from power via U.S. military-backed coup in 2009. Under the administration of President Barack Obama and his Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. Lucy is a host of the radio program Voices of Resistance at WBAI 99.5 FM New York. And may I add that Lucy came to march on the Women's March on the Pentagon last year, and we were just really blown away by her passion and commitment to peace and social justice. So, and I'll be on Lucy's show tomorrow. Just a little plug there from about 1-ish to 1:20 Eastern Time. Another celebration of Working Women's Day. So, Lucy, welcome to our forum to celebrate International Working Women's Day.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, sisters in struggle, and thanks, compañera, anti-imperialist and anti-war leader, whom I deeply admire, Cindy Sheehan, for this special invitation to exchange ideas with you and other amazing women. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Well, thank you. So we'll have time for your presentation and then hopefully some discussion afterwards. Okay. You're on.
Thank you so much. So when we speak about Latin American women under U.S. imperialism, you know that we are addressing a very broad topic, right? Particularly because women in Latin America, from indigenous women to Black women to mixed women, have always taken leading roles in the defense of human rights, self-determination, autonomy, independence, and they have done it in different and creative ways, just like us women know how to do. We are creative. So from politics to music to literature to visual arts, etc. And so the purpose of my intervention here today, my participation in this great conference, is to really pay homage and to honor these amazing sisters, compañeras, comrades, and to thank them for paving the way for women like us around the world and for their inspiration. So from the time of the colony, when women such as Taino freedom fighter Ana Caona in the Caribbean, to feminist writers such as Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz in the 1600s in Mexico, when she as a nun started to write about feminism and actually attacking patriarchy and telling men, you know, that they were so stubborn for blaming women for their own faults. You know, she wrote an amazing poem that it's one of the greatest poems read in feminist literature, Hombres Necios, Stubborn Men. And Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz paid the price for daring to be a woman in the 1600s to start writing about feminist issues and against patriarchy. And the price that she had to pay was that a lot of her literature was actually burned down by the church, because they figure, how could a nun be talking about, these kind of issues? So she is considered like our first feminist, and we love her. And today is a perfect opportunity to pay homage to her. But also, you know, in Mexico, there's been incredible women fighters like Las Soldaderas of the Mexican Revolution in the early 20th century, or in the arts, like, our incredible greatest surrealist painter Frida Kahlo, an intellectual, like communist of the mid 20th century. So these are the women that have inspired me, and there are so many more. Like in politics, outstanding women like Manuela Sáenz, lover and unconditional support force behind the independence battle of Libertador Simón Bolívar in South America, or Josefina Lastiri in Central America, wife of American Unionist Francisco Morazán, or the legacy of Eva Perón, wife of Argentinian President Juan Perón in Argentina, as well as the mothers of La Plaza de Mayo, who are still looking for their stolen and missing children of the US-backed dictatorships of Rafael Videla in Argentina, or the torture women of brutal dictatorship of US-backed dictatorships of Augusto Pinochet in Chile. Some of those amazing women are here in the United States, and we know them. They're our friends. They continue to fight. And it's no coincidence what we see today in Chile. The struggle against neoliberalism in Chile today is really the legacy of that dictatorships that is still going on in Chile, and that the youth of Chile are trying to break down through the call for a new constituent assembly and the writing of a new constitution. Not to forget the incredible role of women in music, such as Violeta Parra and Mercedes Sosa during these dictatorships. Who created what is today known as the movement of the new song in Latin America, and creators of unforgettable songs such as Gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto, thanks to life that has given me so much, or other songs like Solo le pido a Dios que la guerra no me sea indiferente. I just ask God that war and violence will never be indifferent for me. These are some of the incredible legacies in the music world of incredible women like them, Violeta Parra, and our great singer, Mercedes Sosa, also known as La Negra, the Black woman, because she was indigenous, but her skin was beautiful, dark skin. And so, the legacies of these amazing women. And in the revolutions of the 20th century, the heroic role of Latino women, for example, the women of the Cuban Revolution that have paved the way for the liberation of women and the rights of women in our entire continent and around the world too. The same thing with the Sandinista, the women of the Sandinista Revolution and the FMLN revolutions of Central America in the 80s, 70s, and 80s. These women took arms to defend their sovereignty and their dignity. And how can we forget great independentist women, freedom fighters like Lolita Lebron, who spent a great part of her life in a federal prison in the United States for demanding the independence and decolonization of U.S. ruling of her beautiful island, Puerto Rico. So, we have the legacy of incredible revolutionaries, Cuban revolutionaries like Vilma Espín, a founder of the Federation of Cuban Women. And how can we not forget and remember and pay homage to the incredible struggle of Las Hermanas Mirabal, or the Mirabal sisters in the Dominican Republic, against the more than 40 years terrorists in U.S.-backed dictatorship of Rafael Trujillo. In fact, Time Magazine this week has dedicated its front page. The front page of Time Magazine has been dedicated to these three martyrs, the martyrs of Las Hermanas Mirabal, and has considered them as among the 100 most influential women of the 20th century. And, in Nicaragua, we have incredible women like Rosario Murillo, who is the vice president and one of the strongest voices of the Sandinista revolution in the administration of President Daniel Ortega. So this is part of the legacy of our incredible women that we take after, and that we try to imitate in some way here in the United States, in the belly of the beast. But then, we have to look at the amazing women in politics of the 20th century Latin America with the rise of 21st century socialism started in Venezuela in the late, in 1999 by President Hugo Chavez, and that is greatly followed today by President Nicolás Maduro. We saw the rise of women in political powers. Former guerrilla fighter, for example, Dilma Rousseff in Brazil, horribly destituted via a US-backed parliamentary coup and replaced by one of the worst misogynist cabinets at that time by fascist Temer. And now we see what is going on in Brazil with the dictatorship headed by Bolsonaro, also known as the Trump of South America and his fascist practices. It's really horrible. This is, I don't know what the fear was to have a woman in power, and they had to replace it by a fascist. And so we also see the role of, Delcy Rodriguez, vice president of the Bolivarian Revolution of Venezuela, taking a world lead in how to do diplomacy and how politics are dealt with. I feel so proud when I see her meeting with like the prime minister of Russia and the head leaders of China. And just, this is a woman that, it's shoulder to shoulder with patriarchy, and she takes, she doesn't take a man's ruling as a fact, but rather she is there dealing in the world of politics with these men. And to me, it is really important to remember today to pay homage, even though there are so many women who have offered their lives in the struggle to save our environment and the rights of the LGBT community, leaders like Berta Cáceres in Honduras, and also Marielle Franco in Brazil. But we know that there are so many women, so many martyrs, not just throughout Latin America, but throughout the world, from Palestine to Venezuela to Chile. The role of the women today, very young women, in Iran defending their revolution. And so those are the ones that we want to admire, that we want to follow their example. And so this is pretty much why I am so glad to be here today. And I thank you all for the opportunity to be able to bring a little bit of the history of these incredible women. I know time is a factor. It happens everywhere. It happens in radio and TV, everywhere. But, just to mention these names and to bring in their amazing struggle. And for me to be sort of like a voice for those incredible women, it's more than an honor. So I really, really, really thank you and appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, Lucy, thank you so much for participating today. It's quite, it's a subject that's really dear to my heart, and we have supported, the revolutions in Cuba and Venezuela. We opposed, of course, the removal of Bolivia, Evo Morales, etc. I have been to several times to Cuba and Venezuela myself, and I just want you to comment on two aspects of these, and it is about women. So for our listeners who's on board and whatever, who knows or who doesn't know, in the 80s when the Soviet Union fell, it created a very bad crisis in Cuba. Right, because the Soviet Union was Cuba's main trading partner, because the U.S. has had a decades-long blockade against them. So they call it the special period. And when I go to Cuba, I'm always reminded by Cubans, usually, some of the men, comrades, that if it wasn't for the women, they never would have gotten through the special period. Because the women were doing things like grinding banana peels to mimic, hamburger or ground meat or whatever. So, and also we just recently heard Bernie Sanders compliment Cuba on their education program. Everybody went batshit crazy over that. But he didn't go far enough, of course. There's a beautiful documentary by Catherine Murphy called Maestra. And when in 1960, Castro said that our main priority is educating people who don't know how to read. So he sent people who did know how to read to the countryside to teach people. And it was the first time many of these women had even left their home. Some of them were as young as 8 years old. And their dads, you know, their fathers, you know how they are. And they're like, you can't go, whatever. They're like, adios, papa. We're leaving. We're going to go teach.
You know, yeah. And another big idea within the Cuban Revolution for women is that the women themselves are a revolution within the revolution, you know, and trying to beat the role of the patriarchy, and the fact that it is so difficult for them that even today they're still fighting, you know, the stereotypical roles that women are supposed to lead. Especially in areas, for example, of medicine. You know, you see so many women doctors going around the world, curing the ill and just being leaders in that area. And I could mention, for example, many of the incredible women doctors that I met in Honduras, because since Hurricane Mitch in 1998, Honduras has a very strong relationship, or at least had it until 2009, when the U.S. back coup under the administration of President Barack Obama happened there, that the doctors, as well as the teachers in the Yo Si Puedo literacy program that was supposed to declare Honduras free of illiteracy by 2009. And we won't know the results of the program because during the time of the coup, the doctors and the teachers were highly persecuted to the point that they were expelled from Honduras. So we as Hondurans, we know firsthand the legacy of the women doctors as well as the women teachers going around the world, sharing their wisdom, sharing their knowledge in their socialist ideal of, you know, education as a human right, and medicine, you know, medical healthcare as a human right as well. So forever we are appreciative of the socialist doctors and teachers from Cuba for helping us out. And it is unfortunate that right now we're under a brutal dictatorship that is supported by the United States. It's a narco dictatorship headed by Juan Orlando Hernandez, whose brother is waiting to be sentenced here at the Southern District Court in New York for trafficking tons of cocaine and weapons into the United States. And, you know, the Trump administration is very well aware of that. In fact, they're the ones supporting Juan Orlando, keeping him there. And so this is the kind of U.S. puppets, you know, U.S. The dictators, now narco dictators, that the U.S. government is supporting our countries with our tax money. So this is a call of alert for all taxpayers around the United States. This is the kind of puppets that the Trump administration, but not just the Trump administration, U.S. capitalism and U.S. imperialism in Latin America are supporting. This is where our money is going, just like our money goes into wars to kill our young kids, to kill our young women, you know, and to destroy other people, other countries, other cultures. And this is what we fight against. This is what our, you know, former predecessors of the struggle were fighting against. That this is the legacy that we want to follow and that we want to pursue in the present and the future as women here in the United States. Not just on International Working Women's Day, but every day in every way possible.
Right. So Emma, do you have any, thank you. Do you have any questions from our participants?
Yes, we have one so far. Madeline asks about the role of Indigenous people. How can we support them?
Yes, as for Honduras in particular, we actually, in the United States, we have the HSN, which is the Honduran Solidarity Network. And the Honduran Solidarity Network is it's an organization that was created in the United States right after the U.S. back coup in 2009. And this organization, we are part of it as D19, or the Honduran diaspora, me being the representative of the Honduran Resistance and the Libre Party, which is actually the political arm of the Honduran Resistance. We're part of the HSN, the Honduran Solidarity Network, and that network does a lot of work with the indigenous people, particularly the COPIN organization. which was is the organization that was led by Berta Cáceres, but also with other indigenous and peasant groups in Honduras, such as MUCA, the Movimiento Unificado Campesino de la Aguán, the Aguán Valley peasants. So if anybody wants to connect to that struggle, they could either visit D19 Libre Party on Facebook, or they can also go to hsn.org, the Honduran Solidarity Network.org on Google. That's their page. And from there, they can start connecting to the struggle of Honduras from the United States, either directly through us as the Libre Party or us as part of the Honduran Solidarity Network.
Thank you.
By the way, can I just announce that tomorrow we're going to have Victoria Cervantes, the coordinator of the HSN in our program, Voices of Resistance. And Victoria Cervantes was a very, very close friend of Berta Cáceres. So she's going to be speaking about the legacy of Berta tomorrow and what is being done to demand justice for her inhumane murder.
Did we not just pass the anniversary of her murder?
Yes, it was on March 3rd, March 3rd. And because of that, we are combining International Working Women's Day with Berta's also homage. But also this month is the anniversary, I believe it's March 12th, I'm not really sure, of Marielle Franco, but it's definitely during this month, and that's why we're also having another compañera who's coming to speak about her relationship, her close relationship with Marielle Franco, and to speak about the case and how is the process of pursuing justice for Marielle and the LGBT community in Brazil.
Nice. Great. Any other questions or comments?
We have no more questions, so you must have been very thorough and easy to understand. Nobody has any questions. So thank you.
Well, Lucy,
thank you too.
I look forward to talking to you tomorrow, and we look forward to working with you more closely in the future with March on the Pentagon. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you so much. And can I just finally ask that I want to invite our audience here to join us tomorrow at 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time to tune in to 99.5 FM New York, WWBAI.org, and you can tune into our program, Voices of Resistance. There's going to be incredible women like Cindy Sheehan, and there's also going to be Madelyn Hoffman and many other amazing women like Victoria Cervantes and some young women too. There's going to be Gail Walker from IFCO. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
It's an honor. It's truly an honor. Thanks.
It was an honor having you here. This has been a great forum so far. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
So,
I just found a link to that for anybody who is interested.
Okay.
I put it into the comments, so you can find that for tomorrow.
Viva la revolución.
Sí, gracias.
Hasta la victoria siempre, compañeras. Venceremos.
Thank you. Bye, Lucy.
Bye.
Oh, oops, I brought in two Lucy's. All right, so.
She's very, very energetic. So, are you going to bring up Jessica?
Yes.
She's our final live guest, and then we will have a video from Ann Martinson after Jessica about women and the environment. Let me introduce Jessica while you're bringing her up. Jessica lives in Chicago, where she organizes with local political groups and Women's March on the Pentagon, Feminist Uprising to Resist Inequality and Exploitation, FURIE. Jessica is also head editor and contributor to FURIE's literary journal, The Pan-Womanist. Welcome, Jessica.
Hi. Well, thank you. I just had to make
We're
sure.
almost back on time. So Jessica, thank you for joining us, and you'll be speaking on the topic women and organizing against U.S. imperialism. So you'll have time for your presentation, and then hopefully some questions and answers afterwards.
Great. Yeah.
Awesome. So it's all you now.
All right. So the organization, I'm Chicago-based, and the organization that Cindy just mentioned is FURIE, Feminist Uprising to Resist Inequality and Oppression. That's where we do most of our organizing with, as far as anti-imperialism, but also just work to empower women in general. And I think that's some of what the first step is too, right? Women not feeling like they have a voice, and not being educated on these issues, especially millennial women and younger, even Gen Z women who are now becoming more political. And so starting out, we've got on the ground programming that we do to reach people in our own community, but we also have international connections, obviously. Women's March on the Pentagon is one of those, but working with both being able to leverage that international connections we can make and people all over the world, especially when it's something like anti-imperialism, being able to actually speak with and learn from and work with people who are directly affected by these issues, which we are also directly affected by them, but we don't always realize it. And that's on purpose on the part of a lot of these organizations. A lot of the work we do with, like I said, is with younger women. And there's been sort of this over the, obviously there's been all the different feminist movements, but feminism has become very popular in the last few years. Oh, I look like I froze, but maybe that's just me. Over the last few years, I know even a difference from when I was in high school 10 years ago to now. It's very popular to call yourself a feminist, which is really exciting in some ways. But in other ways, it quickly got commodified and quickly became co-opted by organizations that now, that now want to capitalize on that. The idea of saying that they're a feminist, but now buy my product. And so we've been really working to question a lot of that and push back a lot of that. And so I think being able to educate people on both the commodification, but even some good things. So like things, and I know others have talked about that earlier, things like free healthcare, free education are all very important. Oh, it looks like I might be frozen. Check. We're good? Okay, wait.
We can see you.
You can see me? Okay.
Yeah,
okay, I'm back. So things like free education and free healthcare that are so good and that have become more popularized recently are still all domestic issues, and even women who are now becoming more politically active and politically conscious, this is still sort of being hidden from them by these organizations, by even political parties, because like it's been said, both political parties from the war machine. And it was spoken about earlier too, of how it's almost hypocritical to say, how can we pay for all these when we are paying for so much more for the military? But it's not only hypocritical, that is a way that things be paid for, right? Like things could be taken from the military budget to pay for free healthcare, and it would still only be a fraction of what was paid. I think Emma mentioned like the cost of defeating homelessness versus the cost of the military. And so it's all very intertwined. And I think reaching women in those ways and seeing that's what we're working on a lot too, of if you want free healthcare, if you want a better planet, that's also, especially with Gen Z women, what is the planet I'm going to grow up in? military is one of the biggest, probably, the biggest polluters of about how intertwined all these issues are. And that's also part of why we identify at FURIE as pan-womanist is the term we used, and it's based off of pan-Africanism and womanism, sort of moving away. We still, obviously, feminist is in the title of our name, so we still want to connect with those women, but also people who may feel put off by feminism, the feminism that's been popularized, which is really just, white, rich American feminism. And it benefits a very narrow group of people, and we really want to be international in our scope. Let's see if there's anything else I wanted to mention. International. Yeah, and obviously this has been said by everyone. We've had lots of women speaking, but this isn't the first time, that that anti-war movements have happened. And I think there's been a lot of men-led movements in the past, and where are we now? So I think it's really important now that we really focus on putting women in leadership, not just in leadership to be doing the same thing men are doing, but to bring something new, to be able to succeed or at least make progress where men seem to have failed.
Right.
That's what I've got.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So one of my comments is that's one of the reasons we took women's off of Women's March on the Pentagon, because we were being so negatively identified with the Women's March, which is seen as just a liberal, mostly white, privileged kind of a situation. So I like pan-womanism. I like that idea of it. And we at March on the Pentagon really appreciate the input and partnership with FURIE in this. So Emma, are there any questions or comments from our audience?
Nope, not yet. The last thing that was said was me asking if anybody has any questions.
It's so funny. You guys are always on the calls with us and stuff, and our audience is so quiet. Like, I've never been someplace where like there wasn't somebody who wanted to stand up and give some thoughts and everything.
Yep.
So
that's true. There's usually a couple of people at least that like to hear themselves talk.
Yeah.
And we don't even really have those.
That's just because we're so awesome and we just cover everything, and they're like, "What
got
else
it
is there?"
Must be.
This has been a really amazing forum so far. So, do you have anything else that you want to add, Jessica?
I think that's all I have right now. FURIE is always looking to connect with more people for anti-war causes. So if anyone wants to reach out to us or has some way they want to connect with us, feel free. We're on Facebook, and our website is panwomanist.org. So
let me write that down. I didn't know that. panwomanist.org.
On
awesome.
Facebook, can you search just FURIE, or do you have to put in the whole?
I think you would probably have to put in feminist uprising. You could try. I haven't tried that. I probably should. Feminist uprising to resist inequality and exploitation.
I'll put the link.
So it's a lot. Yeah.
I'm gonna toss the link here.
Yeah, and I think the link is just Facebook/Chicago FURIE or something.
It is. But sometimes you have to do the full name, and that's hard when you have a name that's that long. But we do have a question now, so.
It took me like a year to remember what FURIE is for.
Yes. But we do have a question for Jessica. Diane Moxley is asking, what can we do to combat white feminism?
That's a good one. I think just calling it out whenever we see it. I think, I just saw something about like Hershey's is having feminist candy or something, and for Women's History Day, and it's like, well, Hershey's uses child labor to make their chocolate. And I think the more we call it out publicly, and call it out, and make a point out of it, not just an argumentative point. I think people get very dramatic when they're being argued with, and I've had my share of Facebook fights. It happens. Sometimes that's just going to happen with people, but I think calling it out as much as we can in a way that it connects to that. If it's someone, I guess it depends on the intention too. If it's just someone who that person is not at all potentially, someone whose mind could be changed, or someone who really has care for other people other than themselves, maybe just call it out quickly. But I think when it's someone who you can tell is trying and maybe just getting into feminism or just learning about something, I think using it as an opportunity for education as often as we can.
Madelyn Hoffman has a question, and sorry if you can hear my cat purring. I now have a cat on my lap.
Cat also has a question.
Yes. Madelyn asks, what is the most important struggle you're involved with right now?
I think, honestly, sort of what had been asked before, of the combating white feminism, because that almost it makes people sometimes who might be interested at all get sort of like feel what's the word, cathartic. Yeah, they get like, it gives them a sense of catharsis to like participate in, a little march, but then that leads to nothing happening. Whereas maybe if like they didn't have this like Band-Aid looking thing, or some company saying, hey, buy our product that's feminist, then they would actually be forced to dig a little deeper. So I think fighting the ways that white feminism has really just entrenched everything, and especially in the anti-war movement.
This is a tiny bit off the topic, but it's about women, like Breast Cancer Month, the pink ribbons and stuff. It's like one of the products that they allow their pinkness and Susan G. Komen to be put on are couplers for oil wells. They allow them to be pink.
I think I heard of that.
Yeah, they allow them to be pink for Breast Cancer Awareness Month. When the oil, yeah, it's like destroying the environment and giving us cancer. So yeah, it is a commodification of this stuff, and it's also like our next speaker is going to be talking about the military-industrial complex and the environment. Well, the Democratic Party takeover of the environmental movement with their Green New Deal, which is just green capitalism. It's like, how can we save capitalism by, doing some mild environmental reforms? But, it's not really that they don't address the military industrial complex. They don't address how it's destroying the environment. So I guess, yeah, that's just my point.
Right. Yeah, things that end up just serving as a distraction from the real issues that like have a good like image to them can sometimes end up being worse.
Right. Any other questions or comments for Miss Jessica?
No. Nope.
Okay. All right, Jessica, thank you so much for joining us today. I think this has been a really great forum.
Thank you.
I'm very pleased. And we're just a little bit out. We're just running a little bit over.
Yeah, thanks for being patient with our time.
Oh yeah, no problem.
Thanks. We'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Bye.
Solidarity.
Bye.
Bye. So I just want to make an announcement before we bring Sue Ann's video on. Every month we usually have a community conference call, and it's been hard with everybody's schedule to arrange a good date and time for those. So now we're going to try to make them on the second Saturday of every month, right? At 3 p.m. Emma time, which is Central Time. So that would be 1 p.m. Cindy time. And 4 p.m. Diane, Madelyn, Lucy. Also, Emma time is also Jessica and FURIE time, too.
It is.
So we make even time zones about us. So that's the way we roll. So our next one is going to be about October. It'll be 6 months to organize for our next event in Washington, D.C. So we'll get some ideas, some input, some feedback on what's worked previously and what we can do in October. So I just want to make that announcement before we bring on Sue Ann's video. And this will be our last presentation, our final presentation of the day. And we'll stay on if there's any final questions, comments, or discussion. And really thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I think I've been very, very pleased with our forum today. So let me introduce Sue Ann, and then we can play her video. Sue Ann Martinson, I want to show you everybody. Am I on the screen?
You are.
This is her picture. I don't know if we're going to see her on the video. She's participated in anti-war, pro-peace activity over the years with the Honeywell Project, Alliant Action, Veterans for Peace, and as a longtime member of Women Against Military Madness. She was part of Stop the Reroute of Highway 55 and Save Coldwater Springs, organized with young activists in the Mendota, Dakota, Mid-Wakanton, I'm so sorry, I can't, Mid-Wakanton community. A writer and editor, her latest piece and justice activities center around publishing a blog, Rise Up Times, Media for Justice and Peace, that focuses on the media and militarism while posting timely news analysis about climate crisis and the environment, racism, and the many current issues that require activism in this Rise Up Times. While riseuptimes.org focuses on in-depth articles and commentary, on her personal Facebook page, she posts local events and petitions about many issues. Her interest in the environment goes back many years to before we understood the effects of climate change, when she published an article in the WHAM newsletter about the devastation of the environment being as great a threat to the future of the planet as nuclear war. And I was really pleased when our executive council member and organizer and web mistress, web guru, Emma joined Women Against Military Madness there in the Twin Cities of Minnesota, because I've done a lot of work with them. Every time I'm in the area, they always invite me to some protest or meeting or whatever, and they're really a great group that's not so, they're focused on international national issues, but really focused on, there's another kitty. Or the kitties are like, are they women?
They are.
Okay. They want to have a voice in the international, happy International Working Women's Day, kitties. Yay. So I think they just woke up, right? And they
must have. I don't know where they're coming from.
So anyway, I don't know what I was saying, but I got distracted by the kitties. So anyway, here is Sue Ann's video. And like I said, we'll stay on afterwards to see if there's any comments, because I think I agree with Sue Ann the devastation of the environment is maybe a worse threat to the future. So than the threat of nuclear war. So I mean, that would be a quick end. This killing the environment is just slowly killing us all. So go ahead, put on Sue Ann's video.
All right, here we go.
Hello, my name is Sue Ann Martinson, and I am a member of WHAM, Women Against Military Madness, here in Minneapolis. And I work with Emma sometimes. And I am going to talk about war, U.S. imperialism, and the environment. It's a large topic, but I'm going to narrow it down to the Congo because that's a microcosm of a macrocosm. The Congo is a place that's mineral rich. It's called the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And it's $24 trillion worth of untapped mineral resources. That's 24 billion. Among those are copper, cobalt, and coltan. Cobalt and coltan are used in electronics. Coltan is used in cell phones. And copper, as you know, for piping and other uses. Now, NATO has supposedly protects small countries, but here's what happens. The U.S. empire is protected by NATO, and NATO expansion through global partners is now worldwide. And they have special operations outposts in the Congo. There is about $203 billion taken out of the Congo, no, not just the Congo, but all of Africa, by Western powers. And so, because of it is so mineral rich, it's of interest, obviously, to the tech companies. So the presence of U.S. and Western powers has prompted countries like Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi, which are very close, to illegally mine in the Congo, and they send in their own militias. And then this has caused very serious civil war in this country. And actually, the UN tried to send in peacekeepers at one time, maybe around 2013, and they weren't sure that they were protecting the wrong people. And you'll see what I mean by the wrong people in a minute. So NATO's mission is to protect small countries, but they only protect the corporate interests in those countries. Now, these troops are notorious. They defend the illegal mining activities, and it's, as I said, a devastating civil war. And this is a patriarchal society, and raping women is a part of war. But in the Congo, it was horrendous because there were all these different militias. And as I said, the UN wasn't sure that they were even weren't protecting one of the groups that was doing the raping, because they all seemed to be doing it, all these militias. Here are some stories. Physical and psychosocial traumatic effects of this conflict. One woman had a knife at the throat of her husband, and they told him to have sex with her in front of them, and he refused. And then they undressed him, and they threatened him again, and he still refused, and they killed him. Others were captured by rebels, were used as sex slaves. They were held. They couldn't do anything by themselves. They were at the disposition of one man who was their rapist, and he would use a gun and threaten them and to kill them and hit them if they resisted. And then another one was raped by rebels in public as a form of humiliation. And they asked for telephone money, and her husband gave her $100, but that evidently wasn't enough. Then they demanded that she lay down, and they hit her and ripped off her clothes, and then they held onto the husband, and then they raped her in front of her children and everybody. This kind of behavior was not atypical, it was typical. There were several surveys taken. One was by Berkeley. 66% of their home had been destroyed or confiscated. 61%. They polled in the East, they said they witnessed the violent death of a family member or friend. 34% said that they themselves had been abducted for more than a week. 53% reported being forced to work or being enslaved by armed groups. And 16% had been sexually violated, and 12% multiple times. John Hopkins did a study in the South Kivu province. 82% of rape survivors have STDs. 60% have lost their husbands. 30% are HIV positive. Now, this was one province, remember. 40,000 cases of rape. 40,000. And only 38 cases were brought to prosecution. So that gives you an idea of the extent of it. And around 2009, this was discovered, and so there was outrage in the international community by some people, not the United States as far as I could see, but some groups went in, and they established the City of Joy, which was a place where women could go. This is a patriarchal society, so women were degraded, humiliated. They, of course, you know how ordinarily if a woman was raped in many cultures, then she was forever condemned and it was her fault, regardless of whether it was her fault or not. I mean, well, rape, it's never her fault. And so, but, you know, they always say, well, she asked for it and all the rest of it. And their husbands wouldn't have anything to do with them because of it. And they had children, they had families to support, they were depressed, unempowered. And what these groups did was they started to empower these thousands of women. And there was one story, and they had sponsors. One group was asking for sponsors, so that meant money to help women, a specific woman, just like you take on a child. And what she did was she managed, her husband came back to her, she got her dignity back, she managed to build a house and take care of her children, a small house, but nonetheless a house and shelter. And because all these were destroyed. And also, she started to farm. And women in many of these cultures are typically the cultivators. You know, the men were the hunter-gatherers and the women were the cultivators. They were the ones who farmed. That's true in the Native American culture, too. So this was just one example, but many, many women were empowered and again, their dignity came back. So this foreign corporate exploitation has been going on, well, for years. Some of the major U.S. players that the UN identified in studies included something called Cabot Corporation in Boston, a group in Cleveland, OM Group, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, AVX, Eagle Wings Resources, that's out of Ohio. Trinitech is also out of Ohio. Kennett is in Greenville, South Carolina, and Vichy Sprague is in Pennsylvania. So corporations from other countries also took part in the coltan exploitation. This is mostly coltan, by the way. And they were from Germany and China and Belgium, mostly Western. And then they would process this, however they were processing it, the minerals, and then they would sell it to companies, Motorola, Compaq, Dell, Hewlett-Packard, IBM, Lucent, Ericsson, Sony, and so on. Computer parts, chips, game consoles, all the rest of it. It's very interesting that Apple, Microsoft, and Google are among 5 companies sued over the deaths of Congolese child minors. It was on December 15th of 2019 that a group called the International Rights Advocates filed a case in U.S. District Court in Washington, D.C. against Apple, Alphabet, which is the parent company of Google and YouTube, Dell, Microsoft, and Tesla, on behalf of the families of 14 Congolese child minors. Of course, 14, that wasn't very many. I mean, there are many more, is the point. Some 6, down to 6 years old, working in these mines. And so that case, I haven't heard anything more about it. I looked, but I haven't heard anything more about it. So then we come to the Minnesota connection. Now, Minnesota who owns the mines? We have a large mine called Polymet. It's owned by a Switzerland-based multinational, Glencore, 72% stake in Polymet, which is a Toronto-based mining company. And there have been huge protests around Polymet and the mining, and they want to establish a copper mine. They have Glencore has a copper mine in the Congo, and they also have a cobalt mine in the Congo, and they want to bring a copper mine here. Evidently, there is copper in northern Minnesota, but this is not like our usual taconite mining that we have here. This is far more devastating, and it rapes the land, is what it does, and leaves it just stripped. And if the dam breaks, because they dam it and they have water and they have all these tailings, and if that breaks, huge environmental destruction. There was one that broke in British Columbia. It was the worst mining disaster ever in Canada. There was another one that broke in Latin America by a river. And so, and both of them were near indigenous communities, indeed, as is Polymet. And this company is, if they're not using child labor, they had an environmental disaster in which dozens of people were killed in Africa in one of the cobalt mines. They have a very bad union record. They have been in Canada as well, and they have a very bad union record. And obviously they're not unionized in the Congo. So here is this multinational coming in wanting to destroy northern Minnesota, essentially. And the same thing is now happening with the Boundary Waters. The Boundary Waters is an international recreation area, protected, and it's shared by Canada and the U.S. And with campgrounds and canoeing, and it's beautiful. And this company called Twin Metals wants to mine around the Boundary Waters. And they say, oh no, it won't seep in, there won't be any problem. It's again a copper mine. There won't be any problem. There won't be any soil contamination or from the tailings or water contamination, groundwater. The Boundary Waters is mostly water. So, and it's impossible that would be the case. In this case, the company that is at Twin Metals is owned by a company called Antofagasta, which is a mining company out of Chile. And here's an interesting connection they've dug up. They have ties to the Trump administration. A real estate company in Washington, D.C., owned by the family, is the landlord for Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner of a $500 million mansion in D.C. So these things do affect us locally. And when we don't think about when we pick up all these electronics, where all the minerals and everything come from. And we don't think about the environmental devastation, the devastation to the women, the rape, but also the land, because if the women are the cultivators, they can't farm. And besides, with all these militias wandering around, the farmland is limited. It's just a tragedy, and similar things have happened, and especially to indigenous people in the Philippines and in other parts of the world. And I think too of all the immigrants and the immigrant camps and the women trying to keep things together. So the effect of U.S. imperialism, because of course our wars are driving people into refugees, camps, and then as refugees. So again, U.S. imperialism has got to go. Thank you.
All right, let me see if Cindy is here. I'm gonna head back into the call. Well, I'll wait for Cindy to join, but that was, oh, I hear her.
I'm here.
That was, again, Sue Ann Martinson. She is a member of Women Against Military Madness here in Minnesota.
I'm here.
That was, again, I can hear that you're listening.
I gotta
to
turn off the live stream.
Okay. And Sue Ann gives presentations about the environment.
The live stream was giving me some feedback.
That's okay. Sue Ann gives presentations about this, about
Oh, now I can't hear you. What the heck?
Oh no. I'm on, so it might be you.
I can't hear you at all. Now I can hear you.
Okay. Huh. Okay, so Sue Ann regularly talks about this, but her talk is normally like 45 minutes. So when I asked her about this, she's like, okay, I can try to whittle it down into something shorter. But this was actually the first time that she ever recorded herself to speak. So I don't know if she's watching us live right now, but I think she, for being her first time, she did a great job. I know that that's hard to do. It doesn't look like we have any questions about what Sue Ann said. But definitely everything that Sue Ann talked about, she covered a lot of different things, and a lot of things that we don't necessarily think about all the time when we think about the environmental impact, just how specific it can be, down to mines in northern Minnesota that also end up having these connections to people in Trump's family and other people that are just like the elite on top of things, in addition to the stuff that we often talk about the direct environmental impact of war and the war machine and the carbon footprint and the devastation that it wreaks across the planet constantly. Is there anything that you would like to add to that, Cindy? And then I'll see if we have any questions left about overall.
Right now, no.
Okay. Let's see, we did just get one question in from Cecilia on Facebook. She asks, can you speak about counter recruitment?
Yes, I can. So I believe counter-recruitment efforts are very important. It's an important aspect of the anti-war movement, anti-imperialist movement. Back after 9/11, there was a bill passed, and one of my congressperson at the time, George Miller, who was a Democrat, he was one of the leading proponents of the No Child Left Behind. And one of the provisions in No Child Left Behind was that military recruiters got full, unfettered access to schools to apply their lies for our young people. And there was also another aspect of that called opt-out. And so parents could actually opt out, send an opt-out form saying that the military recruiters didn't have any permission. They didn't have their permission to talk to their children. But also, if schools allowed military recruiters, they were also supposed to allow people to come in and say truth in recruitment. And we fought that a lot of different schools and recruitment centers. We fought that they still weren't allowing people to come in and do truth in recruitment. And so there's a lot of organizations that do that. Veterans for Peace, Military Families Speak Out. They do a lot of counter recruitment or truth in recruitment. These days, I think there's not as much young people going into the military, but what I see is that the military and warfare is becoming increasingly mechanized, and so there's a lot of drone warfare. There's not a lot of what they call boots on the ground happening that much anymore. But I also, with the increase of drone warfare, have seen also an increase in these young pilots getting, conscious attacks, having attacks of their conscience for actually, I said conscious, I think conscience, for having their, doing these kinds of things. So I don't have a specific place that we can point people to do counter recruitment, to connect with organizations that do counter recruitment. But yeah, I think it's very important to talk. And also on International Working Women's Day, as Emma mentioned in her talk, it's really important to let our young women know that the U.S. military is not the place for them, that up to 90% of women in the military will be either sexually harassed, assaulted, or raped in their career. So it's maybe a little around 30% of them will be actually raped, and there's so much cover up. And if you want to speak out against that, there's a lot of repercussions, especially if you are currently deployed overseas. And when our young women were in Iraq, we were hearing they were dying of lack of water, with dehydration, because they wouldn't drink during the day, because if they got up to use the latrine during the night, they would be raped by their fellow soldiers. And so, and Emma did point out the sexual assault, not just against the women in the military, but the communities. So it's really important to really work on our daughters and our granddaughters and our sisters and our friends to really talk them out of joining an organization that is so harmful to them.
Yep, and I think counter recruitment is very important. There's so many schools everywhere, no matter if you live in a really populated area or not. There's schools around you, and students' information is given to the recruiters, and I've heard stories of parents finding out that their child has been texting with a recruiter for months because they get their phone numbers. If the military can be in school and be doing that, then people in your community should be able to be in school and doing something also. So if you're a member...
Well, they're predators.
They're actually
Yes,
predators.
yes.
And so if like a pervert or a pedophile is not allowed to contact our kids, they shouldn't be either. They're adults. They're adults talking to children without parental permission. So
Yes. And even if you're not part of a local organization, you can still go into a school and you can find out what days the recruiters are going to be there, and you can pass something out. If they have a right to be there, then we have a right to be there too, and that's probably something that should happen more than it does. But also the school thing is still happening, but like you said, because we're moving into more mechanized warfare, they're reaching kids through, like, there's actual, like, internet-based video games that have been created by the DoD that are like, this is what it's like to operate drones, and, like, you can play the game, and then you can say, I want to contact a recruiter, and that's atrocious, and it happens.
You can't even go to a movie without there being ads for military recruitment. And there's ads they make it look really cool, like the movie you're just about to watch. Like the military is so cool, they're like the Avengers. And so then you watch an Avenger movie, you think, gosh, the only way I'm going to be Iron Man is if I learn how to hold, if I hold a machine gun or whatever. So yeah, it's very, U.S. militarism is so insidious in our culture.
Definitely. It's really, once you start paying attention to it, it's everywhere. You turn from sports to movies to in schools. It's hard to get away from it, but then it's also, since I have kids, I educate them about this stuff. They're little, but they understand. So now when they get bombarded with this stuff, at least they have that perspective. I think it's a lot more important to educate kids about this stuff, even from a young age, than to hide it from them, because then they have no background when they are exposed to it, and then you end up being one of those parents that finds out that your kid is texting with a recruiter, and they're like friends, and you had no idea. That's horrifying.
Exactly.
Wow.
So is there any other comments or questions from the audience?
Oh, I think we got most of them. There are a few questions that popped up that didn't quite get answered by everybody. So when we're done with this, I'm going to email everybody that was a participant with the links to both Facebook and YouTube, and encourage them to maybe look through some of the comments. If something didn't get answered that was asked of them, maybe they can connect if they want to. Obviously, they don't have to, so sorry if you do have an unanswered question in there.
And you can always find either myself or Emma, obviously. So, I just want to thank you, Emma, for all your hard work in this event. And I want to thank our other presenters, me, Randi Nord, Madelyn Hoffman, and Diane Moxley, Lisa Davis, you, Ann Martinson, Mnar Muhawesh, Lucy Pagoada-Quesada, and Jessica Swim, who was representing FURIE. And I think it was actually a really, really good thing. And we had and it's going to stay recorded, right? So people can watch replays of it?
Yep, it'll be on our Facebook page in the videos, and then it was streamed to our YouTube channel also, so it's up there.
Okay, thanks, everybody. Thanks for hanging in with us. I think it was really good. Happy International Working Women's Day, everybody.
Yes, you too, Cindy.
Peace.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.